into human beings is a question I've been asked many times. Why not? We do it. We do it with lesser life forms. We do it continuously. And obviously, at least our objective is to learn more about the life form that we're studying. I'm Dr. Roger Lear, and I've been doing research in the alien abduction phenomena. Myself and my surgical team has performed 10 surgeries for removal of objects from individuals who allege alien abduction. These are two specimens which were removed during a surgical procedure, and they were both encapsulated in a very dark gray membrane, which you could not cut through with a surgical blade. A laboratory was not told that they were surgical specimens. They have been likened to meteorite samples. There are numerous books and videos that certainly available today that were not available years ago. We now have a nonprofit 501c3 organization called the Aliens and Scalpel Research. And we can now get grants from various scientific and non-scientific sources, as well as private donations, to help carry on the research. And the purpose of this, of course, the net purpose, is to get the information out to the public.
How difficult it would be to begin research such as this, let alone continue research such as this. So please make welcome a man who is as brave a man as could possibly be sitting in this room to be investigating these sorts of things, Dr. Roger Lear.
Thank you, Peter. Well, thanks, folks. And first of all, I'd like to thank all those that were responsible for getting me here, Glynis and Diane and Mary and so many others that have been so kind and caring to me while I've had my stay in this really great country. Now, what we're going to cover today, as I said, is a tremendous expanse of work and things that I have done over the past few years in relation to the alien abduction phenomena. I don't do what John Mack does, or Bud Hopkins does, or John Carpenter, or Mary Rodwell. Those folks are all good folks, and they're interested in a different aspect of the abduction, which is the abductee and the story of what happened to them. This is all very important, but what I'm interested in is the physical and scientific aspects of the subject. You might say I'm interested in that which you can hold in your hand, the so-called smoking gun. And I have a lot of smoking guns. So the things that I'm going to talk to you about today, it's all true, it's all real, but don't come back to me if you don't like what you hear. Go back to the scientists that have looked at these objects, because all I am is in the capacity of the messenger. I am telling you what the reports say, and some of the reports are printed in the back of some of my books. Or you can get it by going to my website, which is alienscalpel.com. If you want to take notes on that, very simple, Alien Scalpel. It's all one word with one S. The other, you can get this material through a website for the National Institute for Discovery Science. Now, I didn't get into this subject to prove that this was a reality. It was the other way around. I got into the subject to disprove this and to prove that these objects were nothing except some mundane things that should not be afoot. And over about 40 years of podiatric medical practice, I've removed about everything that is possible probably to remove from the human body. Hair, paper, nails, bits of metal, coral, wood, whatever. So I've seen a lot of different things, but honest to God, I've never seen anything like these. So what we've done so far, as you saw in the film, we've done 10 surgeries for the removal of objects. So far we've removed 11 objects. One of these turned out to be a very expensive piece of glass. And I don't mean that it was expensive to produce, I mean that it was expensive to find out what it was. It was a very strange piece of run of glass by Dow Corning Glass Works that used sulfur in the glass, and the glass had both characteristics of crystal and glass. So it had its fool for quite a while, but as without the application of applied true science used in the proper manner, which should be used more often in this field and is not, can really do something to contribute knowledge to the entire world with reference to the UFO subject. Now, that's what I try and do. And also lately, I've been all over the world this year and for the past few years. My heart is not that good anymore, so next year I'll probably be staying pretty close to home, and you might not see me at conferences. But anyway, I want to warn you folks who go to conferences or have conferences here or listen to things on TV or read the magazines or the available UFO literature. Here's my warning, take it for whatever way you want. Anyone that gets up before you that's a researcher in this field or claims they are a researcher in the field, no matter what their qualifications seem to be, if they give you the indication they have the answers, then you better put at least one finger in your ear and turn around and leave, because we don't. And by using science as a tool instead of an enemy, we can find out a lot of things, and that information that is gleaned from scientific investigation belongs to every single person in this room, every single person in the state of Queensland, Australia, and the rest of the world. It's yours, and that's what I'm here to do. So again, there are people that walk among us that try and portray the fact that excuse me, they have all the knowledge, but they don't. It's okay to theorize. That's scientific and works well, and then you must really take the theory and take it into a lab and either prove it or disprove it. Now, if we could have the house lights down and see the first slide, I'm going to take you through a rather rapid slide presentation. And when I get just about to the end, I'm going to talk about another subject completely, which is why alien abductions occur. And again, I don't have the answer. This is my particular theory. I could be all wet. But I think that I found at least one key to why most alien abductions are going on. Implants, that's what I do. I went to a person and I said, gee, I need a slide to introduce my talk. So the first slide that he generated for me was a slide of Stonehenge. And I said, well, gee, that's really beautiful. I think it's really nice, but what does it have to do with implants? He got the idea, so I had this one made. Next, please. Well, if they're going to come here from somewhere else, I guess they got to drive something. So here's an artist concept of what they come in. It has absolutely, folks, no basis in reality, but it's a nice picture. Next. Okay, this is some of the instrumentation. You can see we've got an instrument which is holding an object. That object has been freshly removed from a nice, fresh surgical wound. Next. We'll go rather rapidly through these. This was the first object that I removed in August of 1995. It's a T, a letter T-shaped object. Here it looks more like a delta wing aircraft. But it's two pieces of metal which are held so tightly together that you cannot move one upon the other, and it's wrapped in a very strange, dark, gray, shiny membrane. Now, if you remember anything of my talk whatsoever, when you leave today, I want you to leave with the fact that these metallic objects are covered with a very strange, dark gray, shiny membrane. A dark gray, shiny membrane that you can't cut through with a surgical blade. And believe me, surgical blades are very sharp. You can either sometimes cut a bone with one, either inadvertently, I hope not, or on purpose if you have to. So this is the first object that we removed covered with this membrane. Next. Okay, this is self-explanatory. Next. Okay, we do use both color and black and white photography. All the surgeries are videoed. We have live witnesses there that watch the surgery. We have some that watch it on television monitor. We have professional writers there that will write about it. All the specimens are sealed in a container for the first portion of a chain of evidence. We use the same methodology as the justice system does. The containers are sealed and never open again unless they're opened under a video camera and are signed for. Next. Here's one of the little cantaloupe seed-shaped objects, and I'm going to show you a series of these. And when I say these are almost identical, I usually try and mean what I say, so we'll have a little test here down the line. Next. Here's another one, and you can compare that to the first one and say, well, gee, that is the first one. But ask yourself, truly, truly in your mind, is that the first one? Next. Here we're looking at x-rays. Now, one of the criteria that we have set up for surgical candidates is they must have a demonstrable object which appears on an x-ray, a CAT scan, or an MRI. Now, I've run about 300 emails behind, so if you email me and you don't get an answer right away, I apologize. Just hang on. We'll eventually get back to you. Now, a lot of people think they have implants, but they don't. They may have objects other than implants in them, or some are tumors or other natural growths that appear on the human body. Next. Here's an object right here, and you can see that it's above the bone. Most of these objects we find are down deep. They're within the close proximity to the bone, but not touching the bone. They're in an area where the tissue has not reacted with an inflammatory response. Very strange. How do you get a foreign object into the body and not have it react? We feel that one of the reasons for this is that these metallic objects are covered with a very dark, gray, shiny membrane. Good. And as I said, you can't cut through it with a surgical blade. But anyway, we think that this might be the reason why the body doesn't react with either a rejection or an inflammatory reaction. So if we could raise enough funds or get some outside interest without them stealing everything, and we could reproduce this membrane, you can see it would be kind of a contribution of kind to medical science. Because you could wrap a pin, a screw, a nail, a plate, a heart, a liver, a kidney, or whatever else, and the person would not have to spend the rest of their lives taking immunosuppressive agents such as cyclosporin or Imuran or some of those. I'm not saying that the drug companies would be totally happy, but there'd be a lot of happy people around. This is the same object, and when you look at an x-ray and you turn the part that you're x-raying in various angles, you can see that here it looks a closer proximity to the bone. Also, you can see some interesting shape to it. Now, this gentleman came from a small town in Colorado, Yuma, Colorado. He had one experience about 17 years before he contacted me with his wife. They were driving down the street late at night, coming back from Denver to eastern Colorado. It was about 11:30 at night, no moon, dark, desolate area, and saw a light behind them driving the truck. His wife is a registered nurse, very qualified observer. He said to her, "Oh, is that a truck behind us or what?" And she said, I think it's an or what, because I think it's flying. And it caught up to him and started paralleling the truck coming over the tree area until they got to a clearing. And Tim then slowed down, came to a stop, and at that point this flying object crossed the road in front of him and came to a halt out in a parallel field to the left side of the truck. The driver, Tim, looked at it and turned to his wife, and they both looked at each other rather quizzically, and he said that he had an urge to get out and find out what this was. Well, that's the last thing he remembers. No, not quite. There's one more part. He saw a light come on. Actually, one light right on top of the other. It filled the cab of the truck with this very brilliant bluish-white light, and then the next thing he remembers, both hands are on the steering wheel. He turns to his wife and said, "Well, I think we should go to town now, dear." So they did. They proceeded on home, and when they got there, things just didn't seem right because 3 hours were missing. Now, strangely enough, because the guy is a cement contractor and because he had 3 young daughters that were going to school and they lived in a very small farming town, he didn't want the word to get out that he saw something weird, you know. So they didn't tell anybody. Nobody. Not the rest of the family, the neighbors, the church, nobody. And then one day, about 17 years later, he smacked himself on the thumb with a hammer, and he thought, well, gee, maybe I broke my thumb. So he went to the local hospital and had an X-ray taken. The doctor saw this in his arm, and he said, "No, that's impossible. I've never had anything like that to happen. I can't have anything in there." And the doctor said, "Yeah, well, Tim, there it is. You got it. Fortunately, your thumb was not broken." So he began to think about it, and something clicked in his mind, and he related that immediately to the experience that he had so many years ago. And it was after that that he was able to contact me. He seemed like a very compliant person, sent me the x-rays, we showed it to our radiological consults, and it came to the conclusion that there was a foreign, what appeared to be a metallic foreign body in the wrist area. And so we invited him if he so wished, and we don't do this on anybody unless they wish to have it done. Also, another portion of the criteria is they must have some kind of distress, either physiological or psychological distress. We don't go on fishing expeditions in people's bodies looking for foreign objects where nobody is being bothered by it. So they have to have, as I said, a connection to some kind of a UFO event, conscious memory, abduction. We don't want anybody to have undergone regressive hypnosis prior to the time when we do the surgery. Why? Simple. We don't want the criticism. We don't want to be accused of putting false memories into somebody's head. So afterwards, once the surgery is done, if they wish to have their memory enhanced and they want to undergo regressive hypnosis, we supply them with an individual such as the ones I mentioned, Bud Hopkins and so on, and they get it done, and then we record that enhanced memory as part of their file. But as I said, I'm not here to look at UFO abduction stories. I think they're all fascinating. I think they're all tremendously interesting. But it's this kind of stuff I'm interested in, physical evidence. Next. Okay, when I first started doing these surgeries, we did the first procedure in an office with a general surgeon assistant and a number of other people there, but we didn't have any time-saving devices. Now we do. This is called a C-arm, and These cost about $1,500 a day to rent, so you can see these surgical procedures are not cheap. Yet we don't charge the individuals a penny for any of this work. We pay for their medication, we pay for their post-op care examinations and laboratory. All they have to do is qualify and get themselves to us. We don't go to them. Next. This C-arm device we can use to actually look through the part where the object is, and then the surgery procedure is recorded on these two television screens. This is an instrument here, and you can see it approaching the object. You can see it when it clamps the object, and we bring it forth so it's visualized, and then dissected free from the surrounding tissue. Also, when we sent these in for analysis, as I told you, that there is no evidence of inflammation, but what I didn't tell you is that the tissue is loaded with a certain type of nerve endings called proprioceptors, which are not politically or anatomically correct for the area. Next. Also, you can see Tim is laying on the table there. We only use a local anesthetic. We don't use general. We have used hypnosis in a couple of cases because the patient was quite apprehensive, and so we didn't want him to feel any pain, so we did use a local anesthetic and a hypnoanesthesia. Next. This is the object that we removed from Tim, and we have four of these that looked, as I say, almost exactly the same. We call them little cantaloupe seed-shaped objects, and they are metal rods, a few millimeters in length by a few millimeters in width, very similar to sometimes a very thick lead pencil, lead type piece. And they are covered with this very strange, dark, gray, shiny biological membrane. Okay, next. There it is on a surgical sponge. This is not the kind of sponges, you know, you get off the bottom of the ocean. These are gauze pads. Before I started doing any of this, I researched the literature and wanted to make sure that the objects were safe in the first place after we took them out, because there had been a few people before me that supposedly removed objects, except nobody came up with anything. All there was talk about, oh, it turned to vapor, turned to powder, dropped on the floor, my dog ate it. You know, just all sorts of things, but nobody really came out with any. So I wanted to be safe, so I thought, gee, what is a good thing to preserve these objects in? So I thought, well, maybe a piece of the person that it came out of would be a good thing, and what's an easy thing to get from the body that we could use? Hey, how about blood? So we took blood and we spun it down, took off the liquid portion, which is the serum, and that with a preservative and an anticoagulant made a wonderful transport and preservative medium to put these objects in, and ever since then they've been as happy as clams. Next. Another view. Next. 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 Is this the same one? Or maybe that was the same as the first ones I showed you. Next. Next. Hey, how about this one? Is that the same one as the other one? Let's take a poll. How many think all these are the same one? Nobody. How many? Oh, we have one person. How many people think they're all different? Oh, you're partially right. Next. How about that one?
That's different.
Is that the same as the one we just saw? How many say that's the same as the one we just saw? One person. Next. Okay, well, you're all wrong because some were the same and some were different, but they all, as I said, I don't use terms loosely, they look pretty much exactly the same. They came out of 4 different individuals. Now, that means something. What does it mean, you say? I don't know. It means something. Draw your own conclusion. Anyway, what do these things look like when you look at them through the microscope? Here we're looking at the object through a small dissecting microscope, and you say, ah, that's not the object. He probably went to the butcher shop and got some liver. But no, it's not liver. That's what the membrane looks like underneath the microscope. And, excuse me, when we were using magnification techniques such as the atomic force microscope, we found that we couldn't keep these objects in serum because serum has an occasional blood cell in it. And you can just imagine if you were looking under great magnification and here come this, giant blood cells swimming by, you wouldn't see what was underneath. So we found that we could take them out and put them in sterile distilled water. Let me show you what happens next. This is another shot, just come out of the serum. You can see it's very smooth and shiny. Next. Aha! What happens when you put it in sterile distilled water? The color begins to fade out. It gets this whitish color. And in this portion, you can see through it. And what you're seeing is the metal that's inside. And not only that, but the membrane becomes soft and you can cut through it. Next. Here's a greater close-up view of the area where you're actually seeing the metal right through the membrane where it became transparent. Next. Ah, we discovered something else. On one of these specimens, actually we have three specimens that have this little area, and these look like little egg sacs. What a strange thing to find. Next. Again, these little sacs. What would that be doing on a membrane wrapped around a piece of metal material that came from the inside of the body? Next. Again, you can see these. Can everybody see these okay? Okay, we had a little French biologist who had a PhD in biology, and she was also a physician. And she said something like, and pardon if I don't do this correctly, but she said something like, this is the strangest thing I have seen come from the human body. And you'll see pictures of her. She's kind of a cute gal. But we had another scientist lady who came along and said, I'll tell you what, I'll donate a microtome blade. You all know what a microtome is? It's like a meat slicer, it slices up deli and stuff. But what you do is you take your specimen and you freeze it in a block. And then when it's frozen in this block, you can put it on this microtome slicer and you can slice through the frozen material, and it makes very fine slices that you can then put under a microscope and you can look at it. So, and these blades are extremely expensive. So this one scientist said, I'll tell you what, she says, I'll donate a microtome blade if I have your permission to take a piece of this off and slice it up and look at it under a microscope. And I said, well, darling, you got it. So that's exactly what we did. Next. And here the material is being sliced off. Egg sacs. Next. And here we begin to see what it looks like as it comes off. Next. And this, changing horses for a minute, this is the object again. This is the metal that's inside, and then the membrane has been totally removed. And as I said, we found that when it became soft, you could totally separate it from the metal, except when you look at it through even higher magnification on a scanning electron microscope, where you can see part of this membranous organic tissue has been anchored into the metal. Next. Now the way that we get the outer coating off is to use an abrasive material. It's kind of like sandpaper, except it's in a liquid slush form, and it's abraded across here, and inside you'll see there's a very shiny metal. Next. More of the same. Next. See how shiny this metal is inside? This outer coating is around here. Next. Now also you can see these abrasion marks. These are not normal. This is not part of it. This is where the area has been abraded or sanded, so to speak. And this is what it looks like under magnification. Next. Next. Now, this is when you cut through these sacks and it's on water, some stuff comes floating out. And guess what that stuff is that's inside these sacks? Anybody want to take a stab? Guess?
Strange gray.
Oh, the guy is a good learner, but no, you're wrong, sir. Anybody else? What do you got to lose? Take a guess. Blood? No, not blood. What? Mucus? No.
Oxide.
No, I'll have to tell you. It's oil. Oil. Yep. Standard Oil found out about this and I'm dead. No, it's oil. And what a strange thing to be found in sacks attached to a membrane that surrounds a piece of metal that has been taken out of the human body where there's no scar for it wherever it was put in. High strangeness. Next. Next. Now the oil droplets were on the water with higher magnification. You can see that here. Now what is this oil? You know, what kind of oil is this? Well, I had the privilege of having this analyzed at a black budget laboratory in Texas. And the guys were very interested in this kind of stuff, but the lab director was kind of ticked because he stood out in the hall like this. And all these scientists who are on the payroll to do black budget work for the military and the U.S. government are in this little room crowded around this stuff looking at my stuff. So it doesn't make the laboratory director happy. But we did subject this oil to a test called Raman spectrometry, and we found out all the acids or the amino acids that are in this oil and fatty acids. But what do you know? It didn't fit anything in the database. And the database has about 153,000 oils in it. So here we are right back to where we were before, and as I said, or I might have said before, many times you do these tests or you use science to answer questions, and what do you get? 20 more questions. So that's why I don't have all the answers, and if I stay alive and keep pursuing this, maybe down the line you'll have me back someday and I can answer these questions. Next. Using a scanning electron microscope, the amount of kV, this is 20 kV, is the force of the electron beam which is going into the object. So here we're looking basically at the surface, and you'll see these strands come off, and these strands that come off are biological tissue that have been anchored into the metal itself. We have no known human technology for doing this. Next. These are just some slides of some of the laboratory equipment that's being used. Next. Next. Let's see, yeah, good, we'll focus on that. And this is the gal I was talking about, and she's a very brilliant lady. Next. 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 That won't focus because it's a picture of a picture. Next. Okay, now we're going to stop with the slides right there. and I'm going to show you a short video of one of the procedures that we did with the object that was removed from Tim Cullen. He's the fellow you saw laying on the table. He's the fellow with one of these little cantaloupe seed shaped devices. He's the case I talked about from Colorado. Now this guy was very interesting because he was mad. He was sort of a simple, hillbilly type person who represented a very large brain. But he was mad because he said nobody had the right to do this to me. I don't care whether they came 10 trillion miles through space or they didn't have my permission. They didn't have my permission to put this in my arm. So he was mad, and after the surgery was done, he went back to the small town in Yuma, and he went to 2 churches. One was the Catholic church, and another was a Lutheran church, and he presented this material on 2 different Sundays. He did a public presentation to the congregation, and he was extremely well received. And it got into the small 128-year-old newspaper, the Yuma Pioneer, and then that was a front page story that was picked up by the Denver Post, which is a very conservative newspaper, and they printed a small 1-page article. So that's the kind of guy he is. Now I'm going to show you what his object looked like when we put it on the bench, and we use magnetic. Remember, these objects are highly magnetic to begin with, but we'll put a magnet over it, and I'll show you what it looks like. So go ahead and run that video number 2. Here's the object, and you see how nicely it flies up to the magnets. It goes quite a distance. Now we'll take it back out again, and we'll put it on the lab table, pass the magnet over at a particular distance. What you're going to see is these 2 little things. I hope you can see it from the back of the room. 2 little things come out, like 2 little antennae, and when they move the magnet back and forth, they wave back and forth with the object. Hello, magnet. Hello, hello. Isn't that kind of a cutie? Well, that's the one that came out of Tim's arm. Now, yeah, it'll jump right up. We have one, I think, in slow motion here. Hey, bingo. Hello. So we took this object to the same Black Budget laboratory in Texas, and they did a scanning electron microscopy, and you can kill that now. And what they found was, if it's highly magnetic, you would think that it would contain what? Iron. Iron, right. Well, it did. Very high concentration of iron. So then we did another test on it called an X-ray diffraction examination. Does there anybody know what that is? No one? Okay, X-ray diffraction looks at the molecular structure of a particular metal, and all metals are structured with an arrangement of atoms, arrangement of molecules, and they form a crystal. So every pure metal is a crystal, and that's the way metals are supposed to be, and that's the way they are found in nature. Now, if somehow you look at the metal and you don't find any arrangement of atoms, that metal is then called amorphous, amorphous. Morph meaning form, a means without. So this is a metal without form. So here we have a high concentration of amorphous iron. Well, you don't find amorphous iron in nature, and I thought you just didn't find amorphous iron anywhere. But being at a Black Budget laboratory, do you all know what I mean when I say Black Budget?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You should. If you're here, you should know what the Black Budget is. 98 billion was last year's U.S.'s Black Budget. Money that's totally unaccounted for, as a side note. But anyway, they look at this, and I found out that, hey, guess what? We know how to make amorphous metals. Now, don't ask me what we use it for, because I haven't a clue, and they weren't going to tell me. But that was a concession. They even told me that we know how to make it. But one of the things we don't know how to make, and so if a black budget laboratory doesn't know how to make it, then it's not in the purview of the field of science. We don't know how to make it magnetic. So here again, they're all crowded in here, this little room, looking at this magnetic iron, which is amorphous. And again, the lab director's out in the hall with his hands on his hips, because these guys are getting paid to do this secret stuff, not be in here looking at UFO material. So you know, you can catch a certain things about this. So anyway, that's one of the things that we find, and it's just one of the mysteries. Again, you know, why do these have amorphous metals? Why are they magnetic? I often get asked, what happens, you know, in the body? Can you detect anything? Are they putting anything out? The answer is yes. We found in several cases that they put out an electromagnetic field measurable on a Gauss meter of about 6 milligauss. And if anybody's into electronics or radio, you'll know that's a pretty strong magnetic field. When they're taken out of the body, they don't do anything. Also on an instrument called a trimeter, we get a mid-range reading on a combined scale, electrical scale, and magnetic scale. And that's also a pretty strong reading. We have an electrical engineer that we've used, and he has designed a special probe that's connected with an oscilloscope so we can read the waves and see what it looks like. And he says there's a good indication that there's something going in and there's something coming out. So obviously these objects are in communication with somebody at some distance. And before you ask the question, are these locator devices? In my opinion, that's nonsense. Because for two primary reasons. If we're dealing with an intelligent critter from elsewhere, extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, time traveler, or all of the above, I don't think their technology requires some kind of instrument to tell them that they're going to be able to track a being. And we know now enough about DNA to suspect that, is Bill Chalker still here? Yeah, Bill's here. You know, he's probably the one that's better on this than I am. But we know there's a good possibility that DNA contains its own sub-electrical signature. And so if you're in advanced culture and you've got the instrumentation, you don't need devices to track beings. You can track them all over the world. That coupled with the fact that I have a case in Brazil where a lady has an object in her foot very similar to what we had in the first case. And no, she does not want them removed. They scared her to death because they took an insect and they made it stand still in midair in a small pencil-like beam of light, and they told her that they could find this insect anywhere on the planet that it went. So that convinced her that she shouldn't have these objects removed. So anyway, I want to leap on, and I'm going to tell you about the last case that we did, which is a case of what seemingly is a biological object. The lady is a professional airline stewardess, still flying. She had one episode which occurred many years ago, about 20 years ago, before she contacted me. She was sleeping with her intended. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. She saw a strong light come through the window, nice big bluish white light. And she tried to wake her boyfriend up. He wouldn't wake up. So she got up, went to the window, she says, and looked outside. She saw a circular hovering craft. What would you expect, a streetcar? And we saw this circular hovering craft out there, and that's where the light was coming from. And I said, well, what happened after that? Remember, this is all conscious memory, no hypnosis. And she said, I don't know. I said, well, what do you mean you don't know? So I guess I went back to bed. And I said, well, you think you went back to bed? Yes. She said, I guess I must have went back to bed, because the next thing I knew it was morning. And I woke up and I was getting up, and my friend was gone. I never saw him again. So they didn't communicate after that. So anyway, she woke up and she had all the feelings of the flu. She said she had muscle aches, pains, her eyes were burning, watering, her mouth tasted like cotton candy and snake oil mixed together. And she didn't feel very good, so she went into the bathroom and she sloshed some water on her face, and she was extremely thirsty, so she started gobbling the water down. She said, "Oh God, I'm going back to bed." So she went back to bed, got up later, went in, took a shower, and as she was taking her shower, she looked at her arm and saw a lump. She said, "Oh my God, I grew a lump. Overnight, I grew a lump. Isn't that neat?" And so she reached down with her finger to touch it, and the lump moved. And she fairly well freaked out, almost passed out in the shower. Not good. So again, she went back to bed, and she rationalized this around as something. It was a tumor, it was a cyst. She didn't know how it got there. There was no scar, no nothing. And worse than that, but she didn't tell her family. She didn't tell her friends. She didn't tell anybody again about this experience. And it went on all those years until she had a friend who took her to a talk that I was giving in the eastern United States. She went in, she said, and she listened to me for about 15 minutes, got sick and left. And she couldn't take it any longer. Didn't know why. And then it took her 3 years after that, she finally contacted me, and she basically lived about 20 minutes away. Got a hold of me by telephone. I talked to her on the phone. I heard her story, and I said, "Oops, I don't think I want this gal in my office. She's got a problem, and I don't think it's an implant." I was going to refer her to a psychiatrist for some psychiatric treatment. And she insisted that it was real and so on, and so she convinced me to take a look at her. So she made an appointment. She showed up, and I asked her a few questions, and as I usually do with these cases, gave her the benefit of the doubt, took her in the room and said, "Okay, let's see it." And so she rolled up her sleeve, and there was the lump. And immediately said, "Oh, she's got a nice subcutaneous cyst." So I took my finger to go ahead and palpate the cyst, and it moved. And I said, "Oh my, something is not right here." But I'm telling you, the way a medical mind works. I said to myself, what happened here was that at some time or another, this woman must have gotten a subcutaneous infection. And sometimes when you get an infection, the bacteria will produce, pus and stuff. And so it will make a tract underneath the skin, underneath the subcutaneous tissue. That's called a sinus tract. And then sometimes some of it will come out and it will drain, and you're still left with this tract. So here's what it's doing. You touch it here, and it just moves through this little sinus tract until it gets to the end. So in order to prove that, all I have to do is put one finger here, where it started from, another finger on the object again, and naturally it's going to move right back to where it went, because it's moving in this tunnel, in this canal, in this tract. That's how the mind works. So I put one finger here, I put the other finger on the object, and it went whoop, in another direction. Now you'd say, usually you'd think, well, maybe that's a clue as to something is strange. Not me. She must have two sinus tracts. And by God, I got 3 fingers. So I put one here, I put one there, I put one there. And I touched it again, and it went whoop. Ran out of fingers. It would move anywhere within a circle of about 2.5 inches. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, when I started playing with it, and really, at that time I had been in practice for about 37 years, and I'd seen a lot of things, this was beginning to freak me out, folks. I put my finger close by the object, and it would come to my finger, like, doggy, and it would follow my finger around her arm. Great thing. I guess you could sit there and play with that all day, as she had done for many years. But, was it causing any pain? No, but it was certainly causing her a lot of psychological distress. And if I had the time, which I don't, to tell you the strange set of synchronicities that allowed us to operate on this gal, you would be as freaked out. October the 29th, 2001. This is the patient. That must be my name. And there it is, folks. Now, if you can't see this, then you better go to your ocular specialist. Close up. Hello. Take me out for a walk. Come. Now, this is for the purpose of withdrawing blood so that we can spin it down and put the object in it, use the serum. Same preparation for all these cases. Now, what you're going to see here, if you're not used to looking at surgery, most objects, when you remove them, you've got to dissect them free because they're attached to the surrounding tissue. When you see this thing come close to the surface, you'll see that all he does is reach in with an instrument, clamp it, and take it out without any resistance. Also, it was kind of sneaky because we had to hold it to get the thing to come to Papa. It didn't want to come. See, 2 fingers on either side. That's to prevent it from moving. We're going to get you. There we go. See, no resistance whatsoever. Comes right out. And it's about as big as a large pea. It's yellowish in color, very smooth, and it's a bivalve. It's in 2 sections connected in the middle like a clam. And on either upper end, you might say it has a dark line. We don't know whether that's something metallic or whether that's totally biological too. Now, the only test that we've done on this so far is some very superficial testing, and that superficial testing has told us that the surface is a very smooth cellular-like structure with well-connected cells. There's the wound that's closed up, gets a little patch over it, and the patient went on the following day for a flight, and she got along very well. We're going to take the object now and place it into the container of serum. We'll then close it up, put a label on it. The label will be signed, sealed, and the next time it will be opened, it will go through another visual process and signing process and so on. That's called a chain of custody or chain of evidence. Okay, if we can chop that off right now, we'll go on to the next subject so I can, I hope, quickly conclude. Now, what is it then, if this is all going on all over the world, what could possibly be happening? And as again, I said this is my theory, but I think others have listened to it, and I really haven't had many arguments. Now, this may not be the only reason for the abduction program, but I think it's one, I think it's a valuable one. I believe that the human race worldwide is being, and has been for some years now, undergoing a genetic manipulation. And I think this is evidenced by the children that are being born within the last 40, 50, or 60 years. They are not the same children, they are not the same humans as myself or somebody that's older. And this is evidenced in many different ways because a lot of different people, and you're going to hear a lot about it from Dr. Richard Boylan. He's going to be talking about the star kids. And there's been numerous names: star children, millennium children, indigo children, advanced children. We don't know why, but I've had discussions on this subject virtually all over the world. I've never had an argument from a mother, a grandmother, a grandfather. They don't argue with me because it's true. The children are different. They can not only do things at early ages, but they also have abilities that are far beyond what we used to be able to do. And some of us right now sitting here in this audience that are in this category can probably do these things, but they don't even know that they have the ability to do them. Now, I wanted to find out, well, you know, is there something that's measurable here? If this is really the case, can we measure this somehow? And so I came to the conclusion that there is a possible way. So what I did was I took 17 functional growth characteristics and I measured them over a period of 40 years, from 1947 to 1987. And I did not choose 1947 because it was the year of Roswell. I used 1947 because it just happened to be that the books on these childhood development statistics were written in 1947 and were never changed from 47 to 61. Isn't that strange? All over the world, and the people that do this are statisticians. They're not doctors, they're statisticians. So we looked at things as the age of running, the age when a child sits up, when they can sit freely by themselves, the age of weight bearing, the age of running, the age of speech, and so on. And so I compared them over the 40-year period, 1947 to 1987. And why 1987? Because that's the next upgrade in the statistical literature, was 1987. Was this an easy task? No. Let me tell you why. Because we didn't measure the same things in 1947 that we measured in 1987. There are hundreds of different things that have been measured all those years. Did you know that today, as a result of some interesting research, we measured the age of patty cake, when kids can play patty cake. And guess who else plays patty cake as a training measure? Anybody know? Astronaut training. The astronauts are instructed to play patty cake. They're in a sealed chamber and they reduce the oxygen pressure until the oxygen pressure is getting, and all they're doing is playing patty cake, and they're watching their responses as the oxygen tension goes down. Because this is a thing that you can measure not only eye coordination, but it's muscle coordination and movement coordination. A lot of different neurological factors come into play. But did they measure patty cake in 1947? Nope. So I had to find things that were measurable for both cases. So I did. I found 17 different characteristics that we were able to measure. And out of all these characteristics, all of the 17, we found one of those that also sticks out as a very interesting factor. And I'm going to show you these statistics in slide format, and we'll run through some of them very quickly because they're boring, but we'll go almost directly to the graphs, and we'll look at the graphs, and you'll see this, and just think about it. So could we show those slides now, please? Yep, the other graphs. Here's the graph, sits with propping. I mean, look at the difference. The acceleration rate here is from 60 to 80%. Sits with propping. Look at there. Look at the difference. Look at this. This makes it very apparent. Go ahead, functional activities. Next. Okay, take a look at these. 16.67%, 66.67, 33, 80% obeys commands, 80% accelerated change. Next. Graphed out, you can see it. Next. Complex sentences, attempts to stand, bear weight, 62.50% accelerated change. Age of walking, 38.89%. Look at this. Runs well, 24 months and 24 months. 0% change. Now, if that isn't an indication that this is a specific genetic manipulation, then I don't know what is. Next. Okay, if we could focus that a little bit better. Here are some of the raw statistics, and as I said, I'm not going to take the time to go through all these because we have some graphs that illustrate it better. So let's just go on by these. You can just go by slowly. You don't have to go that fast. Look slower.
Sorry, I'll go back.
That's all right. Yeah, for this. Can you see those front and back? You can read, if you can read one or two a page, well, that's all you need just to get the general idea. Next. Next. Take a chance.
It's the switch. Okay? It's the switch. Don't touch the switch. There's something wrong with the switch. Why don't touch the switch?
Okay. Okay. Safe. Okay. Next.
Faulty switch, folks.
Faulty switch.
Yeah.
I've heard that before. Next. Especially when I was a young child. Faulty switch, my dad said. Next. You can catch some of these statistics, the ages. Next. 48 months, hops on 1 foot. Next. Next. Here's a book that was written in, is this the one, 1961? It was updated in 61, but it originally came out in 47. So between 47 and 61, there was no change in these figures. And you can see what things were like in 1947. Some are rather unbelievable. Poles and stands, 12 months. 6 months, turns head. Go ahead. Next. "48 months is able to count 4 pennies. Swallows from glass, 18 months. Are we talking about today's kids? You see any change here? Just wait. Next. Knows right from left, 72 months. Why, if your kid didn't know that today, in a lot less time, you'd say, oh, I think there's something wrong. 60 months, 5 years, to name colors. Here's some more additional statistics. 6 months attempts to crawl. 6 months. My babies crawl today, I think the minute you let them go. Next. Now, take a look at this one. I want you to remember this. This was 1947. At 24 months is when a child runs. Okay, we'll be right on time. Okay, next. Here's a question you can ask. How soon after birth do you think your child was able to see normally? In the 1940s and 30s and 40s, the ophthalmologist told you, well, don't get up too close because you're going to confuse them. They can't see, they can't focus, they can only see color, they can only see gray, they can't see color. And now I don't think there's any question. Next. Now, here's a couple of examples. I've had people write letters. Do I have time to read one letter? Okay, I'll take my glasses off. Dear Dr. Lear, I'm writing this letter to you concerning my daughter Angela Marie Christine, who is the youngest of my 3 children. She was born on November the 27th, 1974 in Ventura, California. In many ways, she has always been an exceptional child. When she was 2.5 years old, I told her it was time to start potty training for her. Her reply to me was, I'll do it myself. And she did. However, the ways I believe her to be exceptional have nothing to do with potty training. From a very early age, as soon as she could hold a crayon, about 2 years old, she has exhibited an incredible artistic ability. I've enclosed some of the pictures of her paintings that were done at age 13 and 14. Along with her artistic ability she has exhibited. also at an early age. The ability to be very sensitive and empathetic to people's feelings. When she was in grade school, she would often tell me that she was afraid of hurting someone's feelings if they weren't included in whatever activity she was planning. She has always been able to relate to people on a deeper level than people can, including myself, and I consider her a very good judge of character. I've often thought that I named her appropriately, Angela. She is a little angel. Also, at around 3 years of old, she began having terrifying night dreams and would wake up screaming. I've not been able to get much out of her about those dreams. She will rarely discuss them with me. To this day, she sleeps with the light on every night. She absolutely hates the full moon, can't sleep on such nights. When I made drapes for her room, I doubly lined them, and I'm afraid it did not help. Thank you very much for a chance to tell you about my daughter. Okay, next slide. Next slide. This is Angela. Next. Now these are examples of some of the paintings she did when she was 12 years old. 12 years old. This is not the exception, folks. This is the rule. Next. I mean, I can't even draw a straight line. About the only thing I can draw is flies. Next.
Just to introduce everyone real quickly, this is Mike Rogers. He was the crew boss at the time, the oldest one of the group. Ken Peterson, next oldest. He was the one that was played by Peter Berg in the movie. Sort of a straight-laced, real religious sort of fellow. Dwayne Smith, didn't know him too well. There's some confusion with the name Dwayne, because I had a brother named Dwayne. Well, this was a guy I met 3 days before the incident, so he was just on the crew working, as is the situation with most of us there, that we were just met each other in connection with the job. Weren't a bunch of friends, actually. This is John Gillette. And Alan Dallas is sort of the black sheep of the group, sort of been in and out of trouble all his life. And this is Steve Pierce. He was played by Henry Thomas in the movie, who, I don't know if you recognize him when you saw the movie. He was actually the little boy in the movie E.T. and grown up and playing the part of this guy, who was also the youngest of the crew members. And this was me back at the time that this happened. We were all riding in this crew cab truck. We just finished a day's work in the woods, you know. A lot of people have raised the suspicion that we were all getting drunk and, you know, just imagine the whole thing. But this work with chainsaws is very dangerous, and you know, you got to have your wits about you just to make it through the day without getting cut, because even in spite of that, everybody gets cut. So we finished the work, and this is not a situation where we've been on the road for hours. You know, like we're quite a distance from town, and you know, get drowsy, you know, on a long drive. But you know, we hadn't gone very far, and we just recently been working, so our minds were very keen from the you know, vigorous activity of the work. So it was starting to get dark, and we were driving out of the area, and I noticed a little glimmer of light through the trees, and this wasn't anything that caught everyone's attention as a group immediately. It was just everybody was, you know, 4 in the back and 3 in the front, and everybody was kind of divided up into their own little conversations, and we were going along, and I saw this light and didn't think a whole lot of it at first, and then the longer I looked, the more it was out of ordinary. And this light was just something that was out of place. You know, it was deer hunting season at the time, so I thought maybe some hunters were camped on the crest of the ridge. We were driving north towards the main ridge in the area, the Mogollon Rim. And we're going up the back of this ridge, and it's a very rough dirt track, so we got to go really slow. And the road sort of was to the left side of the ridge back. So we're looking to the right of the road as we see this light. And you know, I realized that the light was coming from a point higher than ground level. So, you know, although it was deer hunting season, I was thinking that maybe there was someone camped there. That explanation didn't pan out. And one by one, these little conversations in the group were, you know, ending, and people must have been looking where I was looking, although they didn't say anything at first. And then we started commenting, what's that? What's that? There, you know? And like in the movie, we thought maybe it was a forest fire or something. Now in the movie, they had a reddish glow to it, but it was actually, see, we compared the color like that of iron coming out of a blast furnace, but you know, we were talking white hot, you know, just incredibly bright the way steel looks when it's just about as hot as it can get. So they had this molten look to the craft that in the movie that wasn't accurate, but once we, you know, realized that this light was coming up, you know, from a point higher, I thought, oh, maybe a crashed plane, you know, hanging up in the tree. And we were asking, what is this? But, you know, it was so dense that we couldn't really see what the source of it. But up ahead on the road, you could see light washing across the path that we were on. And so I was thinking, you know, we'll get a look at it up there because there was an opening in the trees. And when we got around the trees to where we could see it, it was just right there. This is the map of the state of Arizona, and the ridge that I'm talking about, the Mogollon Ridge. It's a great big cliff going east-west through Arizona. Very high area, and a lot of people think of Arizona as being something that's all cactus and like that, but this is the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world. So there's quite a lot of trees in northern Arizona. And then an inset map on top of that would be this, a little more detail. Shows the position of the town in the upper right is Heber. That's the county seat and where all the law enforcement people were coming from. Shows the town where we were from, coming out from, Snowflake. And then we go all the way out and way back up into the forest where the incident happened. Anyway, back on track. There we are. This object was just hovering there. A lot of people tried to explain this away as being the planet Jupiter. You know, they go and look up the astronomical charts and they say, well, what was in the sky that night? And, you know, what could they have mistaken this for? But, you know, this was less than 100 feet away. There was no mistaking anything. You know, Alan Dallas, one of the guys in the back, yelled, "It's a spaceship!" right off the bat. And, this thing was hovering in the sky, and I yelled for Mike to stop the truck. At least I think it was me. They say it was me. I don't remember saying it, but I threw open the door of the truck and I started towards this, thinking that it would leave before I got there. Now, very often on the way to work, we'll see wild animals or something, and we'll point it out to the other men. Say, hey, look over there. And by the time they look, if they're quick, they might catch a glimpse of it and it's gone. So, and that was kind of the situation with the bear. You know, it was already running away, and it was, you know, I was getting out, and it was really not me chasing it. It was already running. So it's the same thing with this. I thought, well, I'll get out and I'll run towards this, really impress the rest of the guys. I'll chime in. So I get out and run towards them. This really alarmed the guys, and they're saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" You know, and as I got closer to it, I realized it wasn't going anywhere, and so I was kind of got myself in a jam there. Gonna look silly, turn around and run, but so I continued forward at a slower pace, and the closer I got, the more anxious they and I became. And as I got closer to it, I could see that it was giving off a kind of a strange glow that just sort of turned just kind of gave everything a strange look, because it was an odd color to all the brushing area, and it was making a very strange sound, a mechanical sound. It was a real high-pitched, high-frequency sort of a metal-on-metal sort of a sound, a real high-frequency sound, and then there was also a low rumble that just, you could feel it more than hear it. And it was, kind of like off the range of human hearing in both directions. But as I got closer to it, I came up to, there was a big pile of logging debris there, and I couldn't get any closer to directly under it than, say, up at an angle about like this, and because of this brush pile. So as I came up to that, suddenly the sound got louder and it started to move. It made a motion, sort of like a rocking motion. The same side was towards us, but it rose up at the same time. And the power in the increase in sound scared me. And I jumped for cover. There was a log sticking up there, and I hid down behind that. And the guys in the truck, the rest of the crew, were getting really frantic and screaming and swearing at me to get away from there. But, I didn't need to be told. I was, planning on how I was going to get out of this situation. And so I raised up and I turned to run back to the truck. And as I raised up, I felt this shock go through my body. It felt kind of like an electric shock, or like kind of like a physical blow that just, if you've ever been, tackled when you didn't see it coming playing football, something like that. It's just wham, and I blacked out. But the crew said that a blast of energy came out of the bottom of this craft and hit me. They said it just looked like a grenade, like it just a blast of energy so powerful it just was blinding. It just lit up the whole area, and they said it just threw me through the air, and they just freaked out because they thought it killed me. They said that when I hit the ground, and my body just fell limp, and they figured they were next. So, there was a lot of criticism. The media would interview these guys, and they'd make remarks about how could you take off and leave him like that, and even my own family were pretty hostile to the crew because they weren't being more heroic. But in the situation that they were in, I don't know that I'd have done any different, because they had no weapons. There was nothing that they could do, and if they thought I was already killed, then maybe the smartest thing was for them to just clear out. But they said they took off. They panicked. They drove that truck in ways that had never been driven before, and that they wrecked the truck, just almost destroyed it, just trying to get away. And they were just so panicked that it took them a while to kind of get their wits about them. But then when they could see that they put enough distance between them to where they couldn't see the thing pursuing them, they stopped, and they said they had this big arguing and screaming match. It was really crazy. They yelled back and forth, and were trying to decide what to do. And for some reason, we're going to try to build a fire. I guess it was just the psychological security of it. But they were starting to do that, and then they looked up towards the rim road, and they could see a pickup, a camper, or some maybe deer hunters passing through up there. And so they said, "Hey, let's go get them. Maybe they got some guns and they can help us." So they threw everything in the truck and took off again and tried to catch the hunters, but they weren't able to catch up with them. And so uh, in the movie they have Mike saying, you know, like, we got to go back, and the guy saying no, and this all happened, but when it came down to it, and Mike says, you know, this truck's going back, whether you guys can stay here or not. Those guys weren't about to stay there in the dark like they did in the movie. So they all said, all right, we'll go, you know, and they got in the car with him and returned. And as they approached the area, they saw a light rise up and streak off. And so that kind of gave them a little more courage to go on in. And they found the spot where they had been, and it was gone. They said they made a search. They said it took them a lot of time to build up the courage to even get out of the truck, but you know, they got out and they had one flashlight between them, and said that they're all just huddled around it, like, you know, these big tough woods guys are all just huddled around this one flashlight, going around trying to see what they can find and calling, and weren't able to find anything. They said they saw tracks go from where the truck was parked up to the single clearing, and that was it. So when they were unable to, you know, find me there, they decided that they better go get some help. Went back to town. There was a lot of argument about what to do. They were saying, nobody's going to believe this. Let's just get some friends. We'll go back and some guns, and you know, and make our own search. And Ken Peterson, the religious guy, he says, no, we got to be straight with this about from the start. You know, we'll just report it and let the chips fall where they may. So Alan was against going to the authorities, but they finally decided they would. And unlike in the movie, where they had Mike making the call, it was Kim Peterson that called the authorities. The deputy came down, and they started explaining things, and I mean, you know, was interviewed later, and the sheriff was called from the county seat. He came down, and the sheriff and his next in command, the undersheriff, they said that they were looking for signs of intoxication. You know, the sheriff says, you know, I was looking and I didn't see any such thing. But one thing that really struck them is that they knew something had really happened here. These guys were totally shook, and you know, one of the guys was still crying, but because of their incredible emotional state, they still weren't going to believe this. They thought, well, they killed this guy, and they're making up this story to cover up for what they've done. But they knew they had a serious case here, and the sheriff classified it as a missing persons, and they organized a massive search. That night they returned, they couldn't get some of the guys to go back. They just would not go back, and never have gone back. They just refused to go back there, and wouldn't ever. One of the guys, you know, for years afterwards, I heard that he didn't even go outside at night, but it was pretty traumatic for everyone. But in spite of the fact that, you know, later Dwayne Smith was saying that Alan Dallas was, you know, the most scared, and that he was, what Dwayne said, kissed his knees because he was hiding down behind the door, and, you know, was afraid to even peek over the window much at what was going on. Alan was one of the ones who returned, and Dwayne wasn't. Dwayne Smith wasn't. So I gotta give credit where credit's due. Those guys did have the courage to go back. Of course, they were with the lawmen and who were armed. They made a search, and one of the undersheriff was an expert tracker, and he was unable to find any sign of anything except, you know, the tracks going in the middle of the clearing. And this was the same situation the next day when they brought out the massive search and rescue team, the Silver Creek rescue team, the Forest Service, a lot of civilian volunteers, of course the Sheriff's Department. They had over 50 men, some on horseback, combed the area, made, you know, wide searches where, you know, people were spaced equally across there. They had some rather strange situations. The tracking dogs, of course, were unable to find anything except a trail from the truck to the middle of the clearing, and that was the end of it. The horses were acting very strangely, and they were behaving oddly, and so one of the horses just bolted They had aircraft crisscrossing the area. They just combed the area. I mean, this was a search that went on for 4 days. During this time, there was a man that Mike noticed had a Geiger counter. You know, he was checking the scene there at the clearing, and Mike came up to him and he said, "What you doing?" And the guy acted real hostile. It was kind of strange because this Forest Service guy, you know, Mike had been the crew boss, and he'd been doing these government contracts for years, and he'd never seen anybody, this guy, in the area at all before. But you'll also notice that in the credits to the movie, there's a credit for Geiger counter man, and this was a scene that was filmed and never used for some reason. Anyway, they said, "You find anything?" He goes, no, this is just background radiation." He says, "Well, how about testing us, you know?" And so he tested the men and didn't find anything. He says, this reading right here is just the same as background, 1.5. And he says, "A real reading is like this." And he put it up to his radium dial watch, and the thing went up to 3. So they said, hey, how about our hard hats? You know, we washed and showered and changed our clothes, and since then, but our hard hats, test them. So he brought them over there. Reading goes up to 6, and the guy looks at him real funny, puts his equipment away and walks away. It's a very strange reaction that was rather curious. We never did get to the bottom of that, but there was a lot of things of that nature along the way. During the search, some of the searchers were making accusations, some of the lawmen, towards the men about, "Come on, where'd you hide the body?" And so the men were saying, "Hey, we're telling the truth, and we'll do anything it takes to prove it." So they volunteered for sodium pentothal, lie detector tests, anything that they wanted. And so the law enforcement men set it up. This is Sheriff Gillespie. They brought in the state police polygraph examiner, Cy Gilson. He's the top expert in the state, and probably one of the top in the nation at the time, one of the top in the world presently. And he tested them in, and they passed. So now, what are they going to do? You know, what happened to the murder theory? People were desperate to explain this way any way they could, and so alternate theories were then offered. But from the moment that I was, you know, hit by the beam, I don't recall anything until I woke up, apparently on board the craft. I was in a lot of pain. I didn't know where I was at first. I was lying on my back. There was a light above me. I was in and out of consciousness for quite a long period of time, and my thinking was very, you know, disorganized. Not really fully conscious. And the pain was just overwhelming. It just kind of like knocked me back out again, sort of. And the light above me wasn't all that bright, but it was painful to look at for some reason. In the condition I was in. But I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and I finally remembered the incident in the woods, and I figured out, well, maybe I was hurt and I was taken to a hospital. Yeah, that's where I'm at. I was at the hospital. So I'm hearing the sounds of movement around me, and I'm thinking it's the doc, and I could feel this instrument or this thing laying on my chest, and I could see that it was about 3 or 4 inches thick and curved across my chest. And so I figured I better lay still and cooperate with the doctors, not cause any problems, because I was in a lot of pain and I was very concerned about what had happened to me. I could my eyes weren't focusing very good, but I could see the vague, blurry forms of the doctors around me. But when I finally got where I could clear my eyes and clear my vision and see is when I saw these creatures standing over me, and I just flipped out. I just became hysterical. My mind was just racing at the same time. My body just wouldn't work. You know, I tried to just, you know, spring away from them, but I was so weakened that when I lashed out at him, the one that was there to the side of me, it was more of a push than a hit. He just kind of fell back into the other one. And when I got up, this thing that was lying across my chest fell off. And they come around the table towards me, and I was just sort of staggered back away from them against the back wall. There was a bench there I leaned against. And as they came towards me, I grabbed for something to you know, fend them off with. And I picked up a long, thin object, a clear glass or plastic tube or rod or something, and tried to break the end of it off, and it wouldn't break. So I just held it in a threatening way and struck at them. They weren't close enough for me to hit, but I was just making threatening motions to keep them away. I was screaming at them, "Stay away, stay away!" And they stopped, and they just sort of all at once turned and left the room. And you know, I was, you know, pumping out all this adrenaline, trying to get my body to move, and I was not having a lot of response. Everything seemed sluggish, and I was very weak, and I was having a lot of trouble breathing, and I just couldn't catch my breath. But when they left the room, they had gone out the hallway at the back and turned right. And that was the only doorway out of there. I was afraid they would return. And so I went out of the same door, but I turned left. And you know, this wasn't big, it was very cramped. You know, the ceiling was just way down low, and the passage was very narrow, and it was dimly lit. And you know, my panic was really, really aggravated by the fact that I couldn't catch my breath, and I was just felt like I was suffocating all the time. And I took off in a run because, you know, afraid of what was behind me, but the passageway curved so tightly to the right that, you know, I was torn between not being able to see if anything was coming up behind me and not being able to see if I was running into something worse. But I finally got a grip on myself, and I looked into a room that was empty of any creatures or beings or anything, and I saw the outline of what I took to be doorways on the opposite side that I thought might be an escape. You know, and after piecing together the layout of what I'd traveled through, you know, in this diagram here, I can see that it was a foolish thought to think that those were a way out. But you know, that's what I was thinking at the time, which I wasn't thinking very clearly. It was just kind of a panicked, desperate, you know, try anything sort of approach. And but when I moved into this room, there was a chair in there, and this chair had its back to me, and I thought there might be somebody sitting in it, so I moved around to the side along the wall before I, you know, moved into the room more. When I could see that there was no one sitting in the chair, but as I moved into the center of the room, it darkened, and I stepped back, and it lightened again. I could see the walls, but when I got close to the center, it got very dark, and I could see points of light, like a planetarium or some sort of viewing method of star pattern. There was some controls on the arm of this chair, and I was attempting to open doors, or, you know, see if I could. At one point I went over to these doorways, these outlines on the wall, and there was no light visible through the crack and no air coming through, but I didn't find any buttons or any way to open the door. So I was thinking the buttons on this chair might open the door, which they didn't. Most of the buttons didn't seem to do anything. some of them would make those lines on the screen change. They weren't like characters, numbers or letters. They were just long straight lines with little segments on them at different angles. And sometimes they would move and change angles, but a lot of times they just didn't do anything. When I moved the lever, the star pattern moved. Not the points of light in relation to each other, but the entire pattern moved. And that was very disorienting because it was, kind of like my whole frame of reference, was shifting. It was sort of a dizzying sort of feeling. I thought I might be really making things worse doing that. But at this point, I sensed, or I don't know if I heard something or if there was a change in light, but the doorway that I came through, what I took to be a man appeared, and I thought he was like from the Air Force or somebody, that was there to rescue me. And so I went up to him and I started, battling all these questions at him, and he didn't answer me. And I thought, well, maybe it's because he was wearing this helmet and he either couldn't hear me or couldn't speak with it on. So when he wanted me to go with him, I went. He took me out of this craft into this large enclosure. It was a large room shaped like a quarter of a cylinder, turned on its side. And as soon as I got out of there, it seemed like the air was a lot fresher and easier to breathe, although the pain was still pretty much there. The light was much brighter. Sort of hurt my eyes a little bit at first, but it was kind of like sunlight coming through from these panels. I don't know if they were artificial lights or just translucent panels on the wall that you see in this picture. It just curved over into the ceiling. It was a quarter of a cylinder. I tried to look around. There were some other disc-shaped objects, machines but he seemed to be in a really big hurry and moved me out of this room, down the hallway to another room. And there were some other people in there, and he left me with them. And I thought, well, because they're not wearing helmets, I'm going to try these questions again. And so I started in with all the same questions again. Where am I? What's going on here? I want out of here. I want to go home. But they didn't answer either. They started leading me over to this table, and then I was having a lot of serious misgivings about whether was I rescued or was this out of the frying pan into the fire. And so I started to resist them. I was still very weak, and there was 3 of them, and they were much stronger than I. And they managed to get me on the table. They pushed me down, and one of them, a woman, had a mask in her hand that she put over my face. I managed, with a great deal of effort, to get one hand free and get it under the edge of the mask, and I started to pull it away when I lost consciousness. I blacked out instantly, and I didn't remember anything more until I woke up. Lying face down beside a highway. It was cold. I came to very quickly. There was a light from above, and it caught my attention, and as I turned to look to see where the light was coming from, it went off. So I don't know whether it was a light on the bottom of this craft or a hatch closing, but I just saw in the dark the shiny chrome, polished like curving hull there for just a few seconds, and then it just shot straight up into the sky. And it moved so quickly it stirred the air, it moved the tree and the leaves and the grass beside the road, but I didn't, you know, you'd think it would just make a shrieking sound, like a bullet moving through the air or something. It moved so quickly it was out of sight. But maybe that was just partly because it wasn't lit. Anyway, I recognized this stretch of road. I saw the lights of the town down below, and I don't know where I got the strength, because when I got to my feet, I was so wobbly. But with the last of my strength, I ran down into the town, and I went across the first bridge, and there was a building with lights on there and smoke coming out of the chimney, and I went and beat on the door, and nobody came. So I ran down on across the second bridge, and I came to a service station there, and there was a row of telephone booths there. I went into the first one, and it was out of order. So I was at the end of my rope there, but I went into the next phone booth and managed to call my family. And at that time, in that part of the country, you didn't even have to have a coin to talk to the operator. Come to find out later, the operator listened in on the phone call and tipped off the law enforcement that the call had been made, which, you know, although that's illegal, it was actually a fortunate thing at the time to verify, you know, that what was being said was true. But my family came and got me, and the sheriff's deputies that were sent out to there must have missed us by seconds, but they did know that the call came from there, contrary to many theories the skeptics had to offer. At that time, I did not realize how much time had gone by. You know, this 4-day search, there was 5 days and 6 hours missing, and I only recalled such a short period of time. I thought it was the same night. And somehow in the conversation, I was trying to get out what had happened to me, and I just kept breaking down. I just couldn't, you know, say it without, you know, I was in pretty bad shape. But my brother, when he picked up on this time thing, he said, "Feel your face," and I felt, and I had, you know, a week's growth. And I looked at my watch, the date had changed, and I knew how much time had gone on. It was quite a shock, and I just sort of went catatonic at that point. But he got me back to town, and I found out all the stuff that had been going on in my absence, that there had been news media from all over the world coming through town. It was just a mob scene. It was just crazy. And the family had received a lot of phone calls. There was a nurse saying that she had been working in a hospital, and something like this had happened. This couple came in and had this incident happen, and when she came back on shift, the couple was gone, their records were gone, and everybody on the staff was saying, "What are you talking about?" You know, so she was warning the family, you know, to be careful about just, you know, who got a hold of me, should I ever be returned. And there was another man that said he was retired CIA and left the same kind of warnings, you know. And, you know, even though the guy left his name and contact information, since been lost, but you know, the family took it to be crank calls, and even when I called my family that night, you know, they thought it was another prank call and started to hang up. So there was a lot of suspicion and mistrust. My brother took me to Phoenix at that time because of concerns of my medical condition, but he wasn't going to trust the local situation. So finally, to make a long story short, in the movie there's a really flaky UFO investigative organization that we were better off not ever having had any contact with. But finally wound up with the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization here, who sponsored a lot of tests, medical tests. There was the theory being offered, okay, all right, these guys believe that this happened, but they were all drunk or on drugs out there, and they just hallucinated this thing. So I had blood and urine samples run through the county medical examiner's drug screen, which showed no trace of any drugs in my body.
How about we start with how you first got involved with Billy?
Okay, a little more than 26 years ago, I was in a bookstore in California, in Los Angeles area, and I saw the first tabletop, coffee table size photo book of the Meyer photos and some of the texts. It was stunning and just had a resonance of authenticity about it, so I bought it and read it, looked at it for some time, and there wasn't much more I could do except ooh and awe. And some years later, I just happened to meet someone in a little cafe in Sedona, Arizona, that had the transcripts of Meyer's conversations with these alleged extraterrestrials over a period of about 3 years or so, from 75 to 78 plus. And there were almost 2,000 pages. He gave them to me upon my return to Los Angeles, and I started to study all the information in there, and that basically triggered this whole process of investigating, researching, and ultimately being able to represent the case.
Mm. And have you had the privilege of meeting Billy personally?
Yes, for the past 5 years I've gone over to Switzerland and spent some time with him and with other people involved in the case.
Yeah. Have you, while you were with Billy, did you at any time experience anything of that around him? Like the UFOs that he photographs?
No, I didn't experience them. Just about every time I've been there, someone who had been at the visit either a little earlier or a little later over the period of time had, there were plenty of sightings during this period of time by people. I would generally go home and go to sleep at the bed and breakfast and then find out in the morning that 2 or 3 people were watching the craft come about, that type of thing. It's actually, for them over there, it's pretty much old news. It's still, the contacts are still, according to Meyer and all the people, still going on, but the craft part of it is, they've been used to it for 30 years.
Yeah. He has come out with a lot of predictions over the years about, certain issues of planetary changes, wars, catastrophes, and he wrote them down, and a lot of those predictions have actually come to truth, haven't they?
So far, everything that they gave him as specific information, meaning where they would tell him a given event was going to occur somewhere specifically, it had.
Yeah.
And the details corresponded to what Meyer was told. And in all the searching I did on the internet, which he didn't have access to at this time, of course, it appears that with the exception of maybe one item, maybe 2, he was the first source of publication of that information.
When you say they, could you explain it a little about who they are, who he's actually in touch with?
The Plejaren, Plejaren, are said to be extraterrestrial humans who are ancestrally connected to us, and their forefathers, they claim, were the gods of our antiquity in many, many cases. There were other extraterrestrials said to also have played these types of roles in our past. And so through their distant ancestors, they were connected vis-a-vis these gods, as well as through some of the either genetic manipulations and or matings that may have taken place also through some of these people with indigenous, slowly evolving Earth people.
Right. So there's been plenty of interaction prior to actually getting in touch with Billy, with other people, these Pleiadians?
The Plejaren?
Pleiadians?
Well, it depends. If you want to go back into the full history of the whole thing, yes. They claim that this mission, if you will, has been going on for a very long time. If you go into simply what's said in the case, you're going back in terms of this being a, let's say, corrective mission, an attempt to get humanity back on path without directly interfering with us. You're talking at least 13,500 years ago. And basically, though they have had certain contacts with other people, their primary contacts have been then almost exclusively with one particular spirit incarnating over many, many millennia as different people. The distinction being it's the spirit that reincarnates, and the personality in person is different each time.
Right.
So they have put forth that they have contacted a specific lineage of prophets. Right. And just so people don't get put off by that term and think that there's some great exalted claims being made here. A prophet is basically a thankless job that somebody takes on, and there have been different lineages of prophets, it should certainly be said, but the prophet plays the role of an announcer of truth, a herald, not for the purpose of starting a religion or gaining a following, but for the purpose of helping humanity to become aware of errors in beliefs, in conduct, in outcomes that are as yet unforeseen by humanity, being somewhat blind as we may be to how the universe really works, that is through the laws of cause and effect primarily. So the prophets have come or been sent, however you want to look at it, as a remedial measure, as a very generous, almost self-sacrificial, without meaning that they're here to sacrifice, but a sacrifice of a lot of personal comfort, and they take on an awful lot of discomfort, pain, very often being attacked, brutalized, murdered, what have you, in an attempt to put on the table for humanity those things which we, if we have the wit and wisdom to do it, would look at, digest, learn from, and use to help make course corrections so that we have a more graceful and peaceful future.
And how difficult has Billy actually found getting that message across? There's been a lot of difficulty within the UFO fields themselves, I would say.
Well, yeah, we could say that the primary difficulty has been dodging 21 documented assassination attempts.
Wow.
That means that there are people out there that are going to an awful lot of trouble to try and eliminate a hoaxer, right?
Yeah,
if
right.
people say he's a hoaxer. Huge, in terms of, let's say, the non-terminal type of attack, have come from, these attacks have come from the UFO community. People who simply say it's, well, his evidence is too good to be true. Now there's a trap. You either have evidence that's too bad to be true or it's too good to be true. And to this day, many of the know-it-alls in the so-called UFO community rail against Meyer, attack him. They might as well be the skeptics. And the skeptics, of course, are another grouping of people. And I did issue a challenge to the top international professional skeptics to duplicate only one of Meyer's photos in one of his films. I did that in 2001. International organization is known for as Center for Inquiry. Center for Inquiry West in Los Angeles. They said that Meyer's evidence was an easily duplicated hoax. And I said, great, will you duplicate one photo? Will you duplicate this film segment? They said, sure. Almost 5 years later, they've been unable to do it. All they could produce in 4 years were 6 little photos of a model UFO that they then emphatically refused to have tested to the same standards of testing that had authenticated Myers as being a real photos, real graph.
Yeah, and but when I think of Billy Meyer, I think of the grown man who's the messenger. What about Billy Meyer as a person, has a growing, from a young boy to the grown man who's being delivered all these messages? I mean, how has he evolved from
Little kid on up?
Yeah, on
well,
up.
that's another element of the story. It's so amazing. It's beyond comprehension in a sense, because his contact started when he was only 5 years of age, and they were not abductions. They were voluntary, and they remain voluntary, face-to-face, on board, on planet, wherever, contacts with these humans from another star system. Over the years, well, to give you an example, his first teacher was a man named Svath, S-F-A-T-H, Svath, and he helped work with Billy from the age of 5, I think perhaps up to about, I'm forgetting the exact thing, it was something like 11 years, maybe 14 years of age, something. I haven't written down, but I don't know what
that's
it means.
all right.
So he told him, not only did he tell him amazing things, he gave him future histories, coming events, prophecies, predictions. He worked with him with devices that were placed on young Edward's head. His given name was Edward Albert Meyer. And by the time Meyer was 7 years of age, he had the thinking capacity of a 35-year-old man, which brought him enormous difficulties because he was really becoming an odd fellow.
Yeah.
Since he couldn't confide in anybody except one man, the parish priest, Father Zimmerman, he certainly couldn't tell his playmates, even his family for a long time, what was happening to him. So He ended up being truant, being put in delinquent schools for periods of time, thrown out of classes. All this time he's having experiences that no human being has had to this day, conscious, voluntary, mind-expanding experiences. When he's 14, Meyer published a letter of Spath's information with the help of Father Zimmerman and sent it around to 3,000 different people and parties around the world, laying out prophetic information about the events, many of which are happening right now. And he was totally ignored. Totally ignored. 1951, 3,000 letters. That's 50, as of today, it's 54 years ago. He sent this out. And when you see what they had, indicated at that time specifically, enumerating all these different specific things that were coming our way, you go, gee, why wasn't there one person or one party of 3,000 that took this seriously enough to start to, open their minds? Well,
do you think it was because of his age at the time?
it could have been, but then again, these letters were sent out. Maybe they didn't know how old he was, but maybe people just wrote it off as fanciful stuff. And in the ensuing, shortly thereafter, Meyer joined the French Foreign Legion. He was like only 15 years of age or something. He didn't like it. So in 6 months' time or so, he walked out across the desert. Very few people, little emphasis there for drama, but very few people ever survive leaving the French Foreign Legion, let alone walking across the desert to get out. On top of that, he met many of the world's major players, people who would become world leaders. He met, when he was 10, Spath took him to meet Gandhi one time.
Yeah, actually, I've read that Gandhi saw a UFO.
It's probably
It
right
has,
there.
yeah.
See, I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
Because I wonder, had Gandhi ever said anything to anyone else? So apparently he did.
Yeah.
Meyer met everyone from Gandhi to Saddam Hussein.
Wow.
Tito, the Shah of Iran, King Farouk. I mean, the most amazing variety of people. And of course, they were at various stages of ascendancy of power back in the late 50s and 60s. He
But
studied.
how did that come about, to actually be from a man in the country in Switzerland to meet world leaders?
Yeah.
I mean, how was that transition?
Well, let's remember he was prepared for this task by people who were, if they exist, they're pretty advanced. And being pretty advanced doesn't mean just that they have craft that fly around. It means that they are advanced in their sciences, in their psychology, in their ability to transfer information, to teach. And he is said to be the current incarnation of a very old spirit, so the capacity to work with that person, that young person, to bring him up rather quickly through the ranks of experience and knowledge. When you see the photographs, as we'll be showing them tonight, of Meyer when he's 20 and 25 and all in all these different countries, you see a very worldly individual who's not just the little smiling, 5 or 8 year old boy that we first see. He's a man that traveled through 43 different countries on foot, 155,000 miles, picked up and did about 300 and some odd jobs in his time of learning and traveling. So he had been given certain impetus and direction, let's say. He had inside himself a consciousness that was very advanced, so he appears to be a very just simple, regular fellow, and does to this day. So perhaps with a little help from the Plejaren and his own wits, he wound his way around places and to meeting people. He made himself of service to different people as a translator or a private detective, a snake catcher, you name it. He did all these different things, so he would weave his way around. We have a photograph of him standing with 2 palace guards in Jordan at King Hussein's palace. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Zelig with Woody Allen. It's kind of like Billy Meyer is Zelig meets Indiana Jones meets Star Wars.
Wow.
And you put it all together and you got a guy, because today people think, oh, he's that little bearded farmer with those funny UFO photos.
Yeah, well, that's what people in Australia probably think that's what he
They
is.
have no idea.
Yeah.
The depth and breadth of this case and this man's experience, what he knows, what he can talk about. To this day, well, let me put it this way. Right above his property in Switzerland, where he lives with his family and people and they work, there's a military base, coincidentally right up the hill, right? A year ago when I was sitting and talking to him for a while, he says, I have to shorten the meeting because I have some people coming from the base. They have some questions for me about some health issues and things. I said, fine. He consults with all sorts of people on all sorts of stuff, not as a guru or as a master, but simply as someone who has information about many different things. And indeed he does. He He very often has been the one who will oversee the planting of the different trees and plants on the property. Since they took over that particular center, which was a rundown farmhouse with no floors, electricity, or running water, they renovated and built it up. They've planted 10,000 trees on the property, in large measure to protect against the assassination attempts. Because there's so many people that wanted to shoot him, they put up a living blockade of trees, which made the place very beautiful.
Yeah.
About his life? And
His life, yeah. So, well, he, as a person, is reincarnated as a spirit of what would you say, an advanced being from another place? Or?
Let's put it this way, and this is what I call speculative information. See, in the case you have things that are factual, meaning not only have I been able to prove them, anybody can. You just take the information, do your research, and go, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Then there's the speculative information, which means I am not in the position to, or haven't been able to as yet, either prove it or disprove it, and that can be information that goes back long periods of time, which we don't have access to means of determining its truthfulness or not, or future events that haven't occurred. As far as Meyer is concerned, here's simply what's said in the case about him, and people have to understand that this is not done for any purpose of trying to start a belief system or anything else. Meyer's spirit had originated long, long ago, billions of years ago, and had already run through the incarnational cycle of millions and millions and millions of lifetimes in another star system, and had been a major leader for a long time in a certain dynamic. It came back into the incarnational pattern, which is not usually ever done, for the particular mission of working, especially with the problems inherent to Earth humans, because of a connection via the Pleiadian people and their ancestors, and going back farther to whom Meyer's original spirit form was. So in this incarnational pattern, Meyer, the agreement, if you will, the mission would involve Meyer's, we're using him in this term here, that spirit incarnating 7 times specific lineage of prophets: Enoch, Elijah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad, and Billy. Now, if people haven't heard of Emmanuel, it's because his name got changed to Jesus and they formed a religion around it, okay? So that doesn't mean Billy's Muhammad or Billy's Jesus or Billy's Elijah. It simply means that spirit form is the same one that was in those beings. In all cases, we've had distortions about who they were and what their lives were like. And in every time, without exception, anywhere in this universe, a spirit form incarnating as a human being is simply a human being. They're not divine, they're not God, quote unquote. They are simply a human with a task to do. Because his spirit was ancient enough and had already been highly developed, it could volunteer to go back into the beginning of incarnation, in fact, all over again. So he has to go through evolution again, just like everyone else.
Right.
And in all the coming incarnations of that spirit form, he won't be a prophet again. It's done with Billy. He'll be another human on earth, just like everybody else. He may have more higher developed spirit, more advanced abilities or something, but that won't be so relevant. This particular mission is for the purpose of bringing forth what they call the original and true teachings of the creation, so that we can get on course. Now, the creation is the term that they use for this very universe in which we live. They say this is the living entity of all consciousness and creation in this universe, and there's billions of universes. We can't quite wrap our brains around all this. So let's just say that when we normally speak of God, oftentimes what we're intending is to say the most powerful, the creator of everything. Except they also say that in every single case, wherever you have a God, especially a God in the sky, you're always talking about more advanced humans who came here long ago as space travelers, and then became addicted to the power of working with primitive, slowly developing, Earth humans, and represented themselves as the creation. They called themselves God or the Lord or what have you. And a huge part of this Pleiadian mission is to get us out of this mindset, so that instead of behaving because we are run by our beliefs, that we will trouble ourselves to start to think, to examine, to reason, to incorporate logic, and to enter the age of knowledge and leave behind the age of belief, or beliefs as well. And that is a huge task. They see that this particular mission, this bringing this information once again, because it's not original teaching, this is ancient teaching. Once again, this is going to take 700 years to unfold. So
how far down the track are we?
we have 700 more years to go
God.
before we will become what they consider to be true human beings.
So what we have to do is discard the belief and go on the search of knowledge, because that is what's going to make us grow universally, not a belief system, but
Belief systems won't help.
a knowledgeable system of learning and growing, and in that sense, because beliefs cause problems.
Cause big problems. Now, in reality, as we know it anyhow, beliefs are not that easily dismissed. You tell a world of 7.5 billion people, listen, get rid of your belief systems and let's get into reality and knowledge and truth.
You're crazy.
You're nuts. And as we can see also, we have at least 3 major belief systems, maybe 4 or 5 ultimately, that are going to be warring with each other, as well as the secular thoughts generated nations and policies and peoples, and some of whom will also be aligning with beliefs. It's a mess because we're not operating on truth and knowledge, empirical knowledge. For instance, I say to people, do you believe in gravity? And someone will say, yes. And I say, well, why? What do you need to believe in it for? It's a fact. You don't have to believe in it. You have to acknowledge it because it's real. The problems with religion, without meaning to offend anybody's beliefs, but you know what? On the other hand, I don't care if I offend beliefs, because I don't care if anybody offends my beliefs. Someone would say to me, well, you believe thus and so and thus and so. And if they identify something I believe in, I'll say, well, okay, well, let's look at it. Well, you're right. That's just a belief. We all have beliefs. And sometimes people confuse values with beliefs. They say, well, you believe in good, this, that. I say, well, those are values I hold of human conduct. So if you go back to this idea of religions, let's say you've got 6 holy books or so, I don't know, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Book of Mormon, Buddhist text, Tibetan Buddhist text, whatever, and you put all those in a nice big old long table, and you get 100 people that don't have any religious beliefs, and you say, we want you to come in, read each of these books, and I want you to line up behind the truth. You know, you're going to have people behind each one of those 6 or more belief systems. Now, right away, you know that if that's the truth, then that can't be the truth, that can't be. So suddenly in terms of logic, we're going to say, well, logically speaking, we don't have exclusive truth here, even though each of you think that's the truth. Because there is truth in every belief system. But just like any other form of disinformation, it's wound up in control-oriented lies, rituals, superstitions, and hocus pocus that people get fed lock, stock, and barrel, and in our innocence, our fear, any number of things, we adopt a belief system. And I happen to think that a lot of people go into religions for actually good reasons. They want to be good people. We want to do good because we have a capacity. We're not inherently good, and we're not inherently evil. It's a perfect balance, and it needs both to grow. We can't just be good. We have to also make mistakes, even deliberate ones, but we have to learn and then not repeat them. Hopefully most of the mistakes we make aren't deliberate. But that is not a fault of humanity. It's a mechanism. The problem is when religions say, you are sinning, and there's a punishment for what you've just done, and it's an eternal damnation and all the rest of this, and we become enslaved by beliefs instead of by logic. And it's very difficult. If your audience, if you are holding a strong belief system out there, and you hear this, you're going to think it's heretical, it's the Antichrist, it's demonology, all sorts of beliefs. You will be defending or attacking through beliefs rather than, well, what he's saying is simply what he's saying. I don't know if it's true or not true. How do I go about determining what truth is? And that's all really fundamentally what the case is saying here.
It's search of knowledge. Go and get the knowledge, and then if you get the knowledge,
and that will bring us to a natural peace. And peace is not passivity. Peace is dynamic. It's evolutionary. It's cooperative. It's challenging. War is easy. We just give in to our lower nature, to our aggression, to our fear, and we bash each other.
So that's what Billy's actually doing. With some of his prophecies, though, he if you take belief out, right, and you've got the knowledge of what he said years ago and now it's come true, it's not that he had a belief, he had the knowledge of what was being told to him, what may happen in the future.
Right, and in all fairness, he may have been told things that he didn't know would be true,
Yeah.
but he relayed the information. He
Yeah.
never said you have to believe this.
No.
Here's what is said. Type it out. and-
Believe it or not.
Or
Yeah.
observe it and
Observe
find
it.
out.
Same.
So when you get something as dire and heavy and dismal as much of the Enoch or Enoch prophecies are, you go, oh, why would I even want to know about this if this could happen? Then and this is how my own process, I looked at maybe 50 years worth of prophetically accurate information. You have to understand there's no junk in here. They laid it out and that stuff was occurring and still does, and things are still being validated and corroborated. You can almost, every month you're going to find 2 or 3 things. Myra's told before that now are so-called new discoveries. Well, when I looked at that body of information, I said, wait a minute. What they've done here is they've given us the most amazing, most significant, unparalleled body of prophetically accurate information. That built a foundation of credibility. Why do we believe or accept something as true? How do we know it's true? Well, if we get something and it checks out, say, well, that's true. Now you've got a body of truthful information given before things happen. That tells me one thing primarily. It warrants my attention to look at the warnings for today and tomorrow, because they've proven their accuracy and they're showing their intention. Their intention is they've taken 50 or 60 years slowly to say, here's how we build our credibility, and now we give you the thing we're trying to warn you about specifically. So if we as human beings have the wit and the wisdom, we will say, credible source. Believe me, my country went to war with Iraq on 1/zillionth of the validity of this, comparably nothing.
Yeah.
Here you've got 60 some years of, altogether of Myra's experiences. And you go, well, pretty solid stuff, the most diverse areas. Not, we know this, therefore we go to kill people. No, how about it? These details, and then they're not telling us to kill anybody. They're saying the opposite. Basically what they're saying is, and this is for our country and anybody that's allied with it, the U.S., unless the United States of America withdraws from Iraq and all military occupation around the world, it will lead to a 3rd World War. And the place that will get the biggest destructive result of that in the world of cause and effect will be the United States. Not a cheerful message for me or my fellows at home, but one that they successfully ignore so far.
So that's one of the things that he's written.
He delivered.
That he delivered the message.
Yeah, in the Enoch or Enoch prophecies,
Yeah.
they foretell the destruction of the World Trade Center. They say this is only the beginning of even worse, more catastrophic events to befall the U.S. of a military/terrorist and natural disaster origin. Devastation, destruction, and annihilation at an unprecedented level never before seen on the planet will befall our country if we don't stop the policy.
As a Billy, as a human being, how does he cope with that? I mean,
Well, he
mentally knowing that these things, the messages that have been given.
Well, I would say it's a few ways. Assuming that he is as integrated in who he is as he appears to be, he's seen a lot over a long period of time, as have these play-on people. They don't delight in this idea. They have emotions, they have feelings. They are not, untouched by the drama, but they cannot involve themselves. So knowing that humanity is moving in this direction is not a happy state for him. I've asked him, what else can we do? He says, just tell people to become peaceful. Show them the things we have to direct them towards that. And really, one of the core things, a new pamphlet that came out essentially demonstrates and proposes the simple premise that the wars have to first be fought inside of you. In other words, that's where the core teaching of self-responsibility comes. In this case, what they're talking about is self-responsibility. If we begin to become aware of our thoughts, our feelings, the impulses to action, and consciously notice what we're thinking, feeling, and doing. With education, such as is contained in this case, and other places too, where there are good philosophies and teachings of moral conduct and all the rest, we will not send out thought forms of aggression. We will not allow ourselves to be stirred up into hate and blind, anger and rage. We will not act those things out. We will think them through. We will struggle to come through a logical position. And this is not about pacifism, because they say every creature in creation has a means of defending itself, because there is always aggression. There's always attack. There's always a defense, because in the dynamic, remember we're talking about positive, negative, good, bad, light, dark, yin and yang, you need that for life to move, but there always must be a growth, a dynamic movement towards evolution and peacefulness, but that requires protection. So if people give up their means of self-defense, it's a spiritual crime. It's not only a right to defend yourself, it's a responsibility. If a person or a people discover that somehow they have bought into pacifism and we will always turn the other cheek, then we've misunderstood, because to allow yourself to be victimized is a spiritual crime. So it's very complicated. These people have weapons, they just don't attack with them, they defend with them. They loaned Meyer one of their antique beam weapons. He put a hole in a tree all the way through an apple tree. Oh, could he have drilled it? Not likely. Why not likely? Smooth as glass all the way through. Everything in a straight line into the forest is singed. When the investigators go and measure, they say, well, that's a pretty good trick with a drill. Burned for as far as they could go. So they defend themselves, they protect themselves, because they're human beings. And no matter, as long as you're incarnate in some form, from a little microbe to a highly advanced human being, you have to be able to defend yourself. And that maintains their respect and, necessary. But you don't go and aggress. For instance, the United States of America, my country, in the last 60 years, we have aggressed 200 plus times, well over 200 times, all unprovoked, against other peoples and other countries that didn't attack us. The latest thing I just saw on the internet, I think it was the FBI went and assassinated a man in Puerto Rico. Now, he might have been a controversial fellow, but he was 72 years of age, sitting around with his wife, and he surrounded his place with a SWAT team and helicopters, shot him and let him bleed to death. Well, that's not exactly a good way to go. How dangerous was that man? Hadn't attacked anybody. These policies, what happens is we forget one of the primary teachings that actually appears in religions, usually, like do unto others as you would have others do unto them, and that which a man soweth, so shall he reap. It simply means the laws of cause and effect. Take away any religious overtones, and it means if you push something out, when you throw something out, there is always an opposite and equal reaction. It comes back in its own time. We, in America, when we see things happening, be they natural disasters, attacks, anything else, we have to also look at the causative actions. Now, it doesn't mean that everything that happens to you, you've violated somebody or something. There's weather storms that happen and all the rest. But just like we've extracted all this petroleum and natural gas from the earth and upset the tectonic plate structure, which we were warned by the Plei-Aran 30 years ago, this is going to lead to volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, climate changes. You're burning down your forests. You're going to have catastrophes upon you, in ever increasing in frequency and intensity, because of your ignorant action. So when you go out and you invade a country for so-called national interests, which aren't your business to do, sooner or later you pay the price. And if you look throughout history, there's always a leveling. One way or another, that pendulum comes back and cleans your clock.
Yeah, wow. That's a big responsibility, getting that message over.
Well, it's a law of physics. It shouldn't be so hard, but we don't teach this in school. We teach all sorts of mumbo-jumbo and either, hyper-religious or hyper-secular stuff that it doesn't accord with reality. Don't throw it out unless you are willing to have it come back and hit you in the face. So if you're going to send out actions and thoughts, make them be the things that are preferred, that you'd like to experience as well. So that way we create peace by treating people as we'd like to be treated. There will be people that will be irrational, there's no doubt. As far back as in the 50s, they told Meyer, there's going to be an upsurge of religious fundamentalism, craziness coming from many parties. And it's not exclusive only to Islam, but it is there.
Yeah.
It's in Christianity, it's in Judaism, it's in Buddhism, and it's in Hinduism. It's in all of these forms that start to polarize so much, and they have the one truth, and they're going to kill you if you don't take it on. Well, you can't just sit back and let people roll over you, but you don't invest in these people. You don't support them with your CIA and just try and direct them against somebody else, hoping they won't come towards you. It's complex. This is real life. There's no snapping of your fingers, but it's either we have the principles intact or we don't. Right now, we don't.
Yeah. And you personally, right, you've taken on a bit of quite a big task, getting that message out for Billy.
Well, I like it.
How does that impact on you? I mean, public reaction?
Well, as I say, the people that I've had the most trouble with have been the UFO researchers.
Sorry about that.
And the skeptics.
You're in Australia now, you should be okay.
Oh, well, I don't care. I don't mind it, because you see, it's okay. You know, because look, I haven't gone through this. Billy's the guy that's gone through all this stuff. I'm a reporter. I'm a researcher. In a way, I don't take it personally. And if people are mad at me or the material, I think, well, let's deal with the question. Let's deal with the issue. Let's deal with the challenge. If you've got a good challenge, what you're going to make me do is work harder. If I work harder, I get in there to refine and find out, well, is it possibly wrong? Is there something I don't know? Or, oh my gosh, it's opening up even more stuff. And so when you come back to the skeptics, with this next layer of revelation that their own challenge has provoked, it's like they don't have enough fingers to stick in the dikes to plug the holes. You know, they're going, well, I'll stick my nose in it. You did. You stuck your nose in it. You know. So, in a way, I say to people, this is the easiest thing to do. Easy in the sense that it's there. It's not filled with lies that you have to keep. Billy doesn't have to sit there and go say, oh, what did I tell you last year? You know, oh, it's this. You ask him a question. If he doesn't know the answer, he says, I don't know. If he knows it, he tells you the answer. I tried to trick him, as I was talking to you folks earlier. I tried to trick him with something I'd asked him a year ago. The answer was the same, boom, just like that. And he's had quite a few conversations in a year, as we all have. He probably has had a few more. So you start to get a sense of a person's character and their truthfulness, and I consider it an honor to be able to simply report what I found here. It's like, I don't, you know, I don't consider myself some big cog in the deal. There's other people who could pick up the slack if I'm not doing this anymore, and there are people around the world now. I've had visitors from at least 80 countries to my website, and I've gotten emails from all over the world now, that people that now have the DVD or the different books or the videos and stuff, and I'm going, okay, well, the cat's out of the bag. You've uncorked the bottle. The genie's out there. Like that sound there, you know. So it's a done deal, and from here it'll just be a.
Yeah, excuse me a minute. Cool.
So really, with disseminating the information, making it available to people, it can't be stopped. It's a done deal. We may go through the changing times, either dramatically and very, very painfully, or a little more elegantly, a little more gracefully. The more people that even hear about the case, you know, I'm representing this case, I'm not saying there aren't other contributing things, but the more people that hear about the Meyer case and start to look, that realize that there's a peace meditation. Probably one of the most important things in the entire case is what's known as the Salome peace meditation, an ancient meditation that's actually performed by not only some people here on the planet, but by 3.2 billion extraterrestrial humans on our behalf. If we could get an expanded network of people on one weekend, 20 minutes. It's on my website. They can look and see how to do it. They can even get from Switzerland a DVD so you can hear how it's pronounced. We could make a quantum leap in peace, because what they've said is these are ancient, from the Lyran star system, ancient words that simply open the Akashic and help to dissolve some of the shroud of negativity around the planet from all these thought forms, from thousands of years of negative thinking. And it's a Salome peace meditation. Salome Gamnan Ben Urda Ganiber Asala Esperona. It's kind of quick pronunciations, stretched out a little more than that. But this is done for 20 minutes. And it's being done simultaneously, as I say, by these extraterrestrial humans on our behalf, but it can't work fully without more and more people participating here. That put into motion is a huge thing that people can do if they sense that that's positive for them. Taking your peace symbol, remember your peace symbol from the 60s? Turn it right side up. It's upside down. It is right now, and has been for the past over 30 years, literally, we've been walking around with a symbol of death. The
Really?
Nero cross, the upside down, the root,
Yeah.
it's a symbol of death and militarism. It's a sword with the branches going down and one thrusting thing. The peace symbol as it's meant to be, and that's shown on the website,
Yeah.
it's a tree of life. You turn it upside down, and now you see those two elements that were pointing down are open and up.
Yeah.
And it's an upward energy, openness, harmony, peace, life. And a simple mechanism like that, use it, turn your peace symbols upside down. Feel free to take it and put it on your stationery. Start using that idea. And don't run out protesting for peace with a militant symbol. Embody that symbol, use the symbol, and don't go killing people with it, beating them over the head with it.
Yeah.
It's not the way to do it. So a lot of this stuff I'm giving, the Cliff Notes version of it, but it's in the case, and there's plenty there that gets right down to how societies need to structure, what's appropriate for immigration in worlds where you still have various countries and boundaries and borders, why we should dismantle every nuclear power plant, how toxic that is, the proper way to have rotations of births to limit population naturally so we don't have to have pestilence and disease and wars, and we bring... You'd be so surprised. You go, oh, where's the UFOs? Well, that's the ships they came in. Like in our country, Columbus arrived offshore with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Okay, great, we got the ships out of the way. Who are these guys and what are they here for?
Yeah, right.
In this case, okay, it's very dazzling and fancy UFOs. Oh, extraterrestrials, how wonderful. Well, what are you here for? That's why when people talk about so-called contact cases and what they're photographing and filming, I say, I don't even care about UFOs because I can't do anything with UFOs. I've seen them. I've seen the best UFO photos and films in the world. Okay, now what? What's the content? What do they have to offer? What piece of the puzzle are they putting on the table for us to put in place? Not what are they going to do to set us straight. I don't want anybody coming to save me again because you're in trouble all over again.
Yeah.
No. What's the piece of the puzzle here? They put that one down. We've got our own. Okay, now the picture starts to come into shape.
Yeah.
And that's
That's
very
what
much
it's
what
all
we're
about.
trying to do here, yeah. It's not dramatic, it's slow. Leadership, not from the top down, from the bottom up.
Exactly.
One person at a time. Someone who starts to get this and discusses with those, not to teach and make people follow or get involved. If someone resonates, if they're interested and you're talking, you start to create that network, that 100th monkey thing happens, the ripples in the pond, all the different stones are dropping. Now you've got these different interference patterns that are creating a web of strength in consciousness, and that will be the foundation upon which a new world, not a new world order, but a new world gets built.
Yeah.
So we're leaving that idea behind.
Yeah.
And
We're beyond.
we're beyond that, and it's going to be very, interesting the way we go
Interesting
about it.
times.
These are people, by the way, the extraterrestrials in our case have calluses in their hands. They work on their own land. Now they're not dependent on that for their food. They have high, agricultural, but these are people that have gotten back to the primary idea that you live somewhere and you work somewhere and you take care of life and you contribute to your society and your society contributes to you. They don't have politics anymore and they don't have money. They have high accountability. Their leaders are the most spiritually and philosophically wise people who also have to do their 2 hours of work every day on the planet. So you don't have hierarchies, you don't have celebrities, and they're not there to accumulate wealth. How many pieces of paper do you need if you have access to a craft in which you can leave the planet and travel through the cosmos, you can learn the most amazing things, you can interact with other, give me green pieces of paper, and Australian money is very beautiful. It really is, but I'll take the capacity to do all this stuff. The price.
I'll take the ride.
Wouldn't you take the ride?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the price for the ride is to give up acquisitiveness and trying to accumulate the excessively unnecessary amounts of material goods.
You can have my camera then.
Okay,
start?
I've been waiting for
How do
that.
we start?
That's what this was leading to, I want that camera.
You want the camera? Yeah.
So-
oh well, that's amazing.
And they have to
Yeah.
they have to conform to certain order, but they
Yeah.
have great freedom at the same time.
Yeah, and I don't doubt that tonight people will be very enlightened with your information. So
I will wear a protective suit.
thank you.
Since the beginning of time, we have asked, who are we? What happened before the Big Bang and what's going to happen after the universe ends? And pretty much, I'm gonna present to you some possibilities. I don't have the answers. I'm just a human being like everybody else. I don't think one person has the answer. I think we all have the answer. I think every single one of us in this room is sitting here because we're a part of something. And I don't know if everybody knows everybody in here, but I hope you've taken the opportunity since you've been here to meet new friends, because I think it is very important, and I found it's very important for myself to talk to other people and talk about your experiences, because I think that's how we find the answers. Somebody said to me one time, he who unlocks the secrets of the universe holds the keys to the future of mankind, and I really do believe that. So I'm Kathleen M. Anderson with an E. I was born in Connecticut. I've lived in Connecticut. I'm a New Englander. Lived in Los Angeles, traveled around the country. I've worked in newspaper, television, good things like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't pay to be a writer. In the United States, it's one of the lowest paying jobs in the country, so I do have a mortgage business, which is when times get economically bad in the United States, people need money. They need to keep taking more money out of their house. So that's what I do. And as I said, I'm here to just present information, not to make any conclusions. I'm trying to find the answers just like everybody else. If I say 99 things, or 100 things, and I say one thing that you haven't heard before, then maybe I've said something to help you. So on June 24th, approximately 3 o'clock in 1947, a pilot by the name of Kenneth Arnold was flying, and if I'm in your way, let me know. A pilot by the name of Kenneth Arnold was flying from Oregon to his home in Idaho when a glint of light caught his eye. And as you probably all know the story, he reported 9 flying objects over Mount Rainier, which is 14,410 feet. The press got a hold of the story because Kenneth Arnold was part of the sheriff's deputy, and it started a UFO frenzy that is continuing to this day from 1947. The name Flying Saucer came about because one of the objects that Kenneth had seen, obviously, was around and skipped on the air like a flying saucer. But if we go back and say, is this the beginning of ufology? No, I don't think it's the beginning of ufology. I think ufology has been with us for a very, very long time. This is Mount Rainier. It's a very large mountain. It comes out of sea level and goes up high. About 3 years ago, I was talking to somebody, and they said, you really need to look at the history. You really need to look at history. And I said, I don't really want to look at history. I don't like history. History is not. Geography I like. History is not one of my favorite subjects. And they said, you have to look at history, because maybe the key to what's going on now is in history. Because I said, well, I want to know what they're doing here. I want to know who the Greys are. What's UFOs? What do they want? What's their agenda? I want it right here. I'm an Aries, so I tend to be impetuous. So I started doing some digging. I've always been a Zachariah Sitchin fan, but I kept going through, and I didn't grow up with the Bible, but I started to digging into holy books, not just the Bible, but the Kabbalah and other mythology. I'm Celtic, I'm Irish, and said, maybe if we take mythology, archaeology, and these holy books, maybe they all come down to one source. And maybe the stories that we hear have some clue to who we are, and who are we, and what's happening here. So, we all know Ezekiel and Elijah and Moses. They've had some contact with gods, and I always say gods with little g, and that's not to offend anybody that is religious here, but I do believe there was gods with little g's, because the gods with the little g's had the capacity to fly in the sky. And if you look at some of the stuff that was written, and as I said, I'm a pupil of Zachariah Sitchin. I took his last class that he held, accreditation, so I could teach his material. But I didn't want to be controversial, because Zachariah Sitchin, let's face it, is a man. He's just like everybody else. What does he know? I mean, he's just going to interpret everything. So I started doing a lot of research at the cuneiform writings of Oxford University, University of Pennsylvania, and University of Chicago, and said, how do the scholars look at what happened in the past. And who are these gods? What were they flying in? You know, what were they doing up there? So we go down and we realize when we start looking at the commonality of stories that the gods have the same characteristics as we do. I mean, they're very similar. They had 2 arms, 2 legs. And that they had the same characteristics that we do. You know, they experienced love, the Inanna thing, love and hate and war. They were jealous, they ate, they had sex, and they drank beer. They liked all the indulgences that we do as humans do. Now, a lot of people see the depictions that are sitting in Iraq right now, and isn't that funny? You know, we talk about kind of the coincidence. It says to me, well, the Mesopotamian Valley is some of the oldest in the world, and yet the United States has chosen to go over there and have a war. And of course, I was always, my biggest thing was, I was, well, wait a minute here, what's going on there? There's some wonderful artifacts that could be lost through this whole thing. So, a lot of people think that the big, you know, I come across people and they say, they think that basically from the writings we've had from Sumerians, that the Sumerians are the big, tall, bearded beings that were there, and they're not, of course. Those are the Assyrians and the Babylonians. The Sumerians sprang into the Mesopotamian Valley about 5000 BC. No one knows where they came from. If you look at mainstream archaeology, they don't know. Some people say they came from the sea. So pretty much what we do know from archaeology in Oxford University, University of Pennsylvania, and Chicago, not Zachariah Sitchin, is that they came with them and brought us a culture. They actually gave us the wheel, astronomy, astrology, how to build roads, how to harvest grains, everything that man would know to survive. And they also brought with us very, very interesting stories, including one tale of Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh, as probably everybody knows if you read it, please, if you can find a copy of the Book of Enoch, read it and find out that there's, if you take that basis of what was left to us in writing, our first forms of writing later became things that we interpret in the Bible. There's a game when you're a child in the United States called telephone. And telephone is that somebody tells a story here and that person passes it down and they call and they call and they call and they call. By the time we started with this story and by the time we end up with this story, has a lot of interpretation and meaning. And that's pretty much how I feel about what's happened to anything we read. It's interpretation of man. And let's face it, I'm a writer and I know that when I write something, you put a little bit of your own ego in there. So you say, what does Sumerians have to do with UFOs? I think they have a lot to do with UFOs. Because they left us a tale of gods, little g gods, that were in the sky and they could fly. They came down from the heavens. As we know with Ezekiel, they came with the fiery chariots, the wheels. There's a good book out, I don't know if you can even find it anymore. I think it's called The Gemini Project. It's a really rare book. Maybe Bill Chucker has that in his library. It was written by a Gemini engineer who actually took apart the Bible, and he was a designer of one of the Gemini projects for NASA, and said that there's so many commonalities in how to build a rocket that go into space versus what you see in the Bible. You just have to look. So what they left us, the Sumerians, they told us a tale of the Anunnaki. And somebody brought a good point up a couple of years ago, and they said the Anunnaki were actually the givers of life. They were the gods that gave us life, that created us. And we all know that the Egyptians had the Ankh. Well, Egyptians don't say Ankh. And Ankh is A-N-K-H. Anunnaki. So if you look at Anunnaki, who are the Egyptians talking about? The Anunnaki that gave us life, because that's what the Ankh is, key of life. So you say, okay, what does this have to do about UFOs? Well, we still have gods in the sky. Oops, I just want to see if you're awake. There's the back of my Australian cattle dog, Can-Do, and horses. I'm a horse person. So we go on from the Sumerians, because you remember, if you listen to the tales of the Sumerians, they told about that the gods were here. Why were the gods here? They were here, they came to visit. They had a crew of workers. They were here for gold. They were processing gold. If you look at, a lot of you probably read about monatomic gold, and people are always in search of monatomic gold, which the gods had, which they had converted gold into powder. And they ingested, and it opened their pineal gland and made them radiant. And if you listen to the story of Noah, he was born with very radiant eyes. And his father, Lamech, is it? Thought, wait a minute here, he must be part God. So we move on to the story of how we were created, and we're coming up to the future here, and we look at whatever evidence we have in the United States right now, and we have what we call glyphs, petroglyphs that are around the country. This is in Washington State, and of course the Native Americans say the same story. Actually, their story in most of Western Washington, Native Americans say that they actually came from a big shell in the sky. And the shell landed and all these little people came out. So you think, Now, I'm curious about this photo because I'd like to know if it corresponds with anything that's in Australia. No? Yes, maybe? These are on the Columbia River. And I talked about how the Anunnaki were supposedly, if you listen to the Sumerians, talked about the Anunnaki were gods from heaven that basically ingested gold and could have they had radiant rays coming off of them. So I started doing some research about, these are petroglyphs on the Columbia River. And if you always notice in the United States, you'll see a lot of our old petroglyphs have these radiant beings. And you know, if you look at archaeologists, they say, oh, because they were gods. And I go, what does that have to do with it? No, I don't understand the connection. And bouncing down to the Anasazi, I went down there about 10 years ago, no, less than 10 years ago. And I went on a tour of all the pueblos and everything like that, and they said, oh, the Anasazi, they disappeared, and they used to wear these clothes over here, and they had all the sophisticated plumbing and these kivas, and they had a religion and everything. And then they ran out in the desert and they lived in a tent. And I go, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would they have all the sophisticated stuff? And why would they go be living in a teepee after that? So I said to the ranger, I said, well, how do you know what they look like if you don't have any skeletons? And he said, it's all hypothesis. I said, that makes a little more sense. You're just conjuring up what you think archaeologists, no blast on archaeologists here, but you're only saying that, you know, this is logical. So I've never been a person that would, you know, take what somebody tells me as gospel. Now, going back to Washington State, because I'm going to cut this down really short, the Yakima Reservation, I don't know if a lot of people have heard about Mount Adams, Yakima Reservation. It's a very mysterious place in Washington State. For years and years and years, we've had earth lights. Paul Devereaux has done a lot of research there, Greg Long. We don't know what goes on there. There's 125,000 acres of wilderness that you can't get into. There's a lot of rumblings underground. There's earth light. There's things that look like spaceships coming out of remote areas that nobody could, big cities coming out of the ground. Columns of light, fires that look like fires. Really weird sounds, Bigfoot sightings. And we're talking about, we'll jump to Bigfoot Valley. One of the recent cases that I have, and you know, Travis, you have the courage to get up here on stage, but you know, as a researcher, and I'm state director for MUFON for Washington State and also on the board of MUFON, a lot of people just never do come to us. And when they come to us, they don't give us their permission to tell their story. But if you look at the commonality, I have never seen a UFO. I don't know, probably everybody in this room has seen a UFO. I can find out the commonality is that there's a lot of information, Bill Chalker probably knows this, and Roger, a lot of information that actually comes up in cases that we can't divulge, number one. And number two, there's just too much in common with other people. You know, that doesn't make sense. You go, how did this person have the same information as this person? So one of the cases I just did recently is in the Bigfoot Valley. I don't know how the Bigfoot Valley got its name. Nobody's ever seen a Bigfoot. But there was a couple looking out in bed, and they saw this mountain, and down comes one sphere, but I kind of had to put it in the direction, and it shoots down, and then shoots back up again. And I'm bringing up the sphere because in the United States, a lot of our sightings right now are more globe-type golden spheres, which was a sign of, I think, talk when you come right down to it. If you look, this comes from the National UFO Reporting Center, and Peter Davenport would be very upset with me if I didn't tell you to go get his brochure out that I put on the table there and his business card, and check out his website. But we're getting an awful lot of this over the past, especially the past year. And if you think about aviation, I'm not a pilot, that if you're going to develop some kind of flying machine to go around, I guess this, a round globe would be the perfect thing to get around in. You wouldn't have to go forward or backwards easily. We had another golden orb that came. I had to use that graphic, but come down. We've had a couple of them in Washington State now. I don't know what's going on. I really don't, but I know something is going on. Another lot of reports that we get is iridium satellites. I don't know if you get iridium satellites here, do you? They basically go across and then they flare up when they catch the suns. We get a lot of reports from there. So we go back to Travis's experience and everybody else's experience, and you say, what is going on here? You know, and I heard somebody actually mention about Travis's nationality. I'm a big fan of Sir Lawrence Gardner also, and you look at, you know, what could be possible? What if there was a civilization of gods, and they had to leave the planet, which they did, we know they had to leave. Unfortunately, man took over, kind of made a whole mess of things, changed things. So did they leave behind possibly the Watchers? And what are they watching for? What are they looking for? Travis and I were talking about DNA, and we were saying that, you know, we're just finding out so many things about DNA now. What are they going to find out? Like, they were saying there's so many strands in the DNA chain that don't mean anything. And we all agreed, and Jerry was saying, do they really not mean anything, or do they really, we just don't understand what they mean? And is everybody in here, and this sounds horrible, but is everybody in here possibly in here for a reason? Maybe you're not out watching rugby or football. Maybe you're in here because you're a descendant of something that was here, and maybe you are being monitored. And that's how we look at it at MUFON. We're finding out there was some statistics we just released, and I don't know if you're going to read about them too much unless you get the MUFON journal. And over all the years that we've done cases, we have found that on the abduction scenario, there's actually 3 types of situations. There's people that actually participate. There's people that are willing participants. There's people, I have had dreams about this, so that's why it's kind of creepy in a sense. There's actually people that help other people, like, come on, come over here. And there's people that go unwillingly or don't understand that they're part of it. And so we have to question, is part of the whole abduction a DNA study? Are we being watched? Are we descendants? There is a high amount of Celtic people and Celtic backgrounds that do fall under abductions. I don't know why, but that's a fact. That's an absolute fact. There is statistics. I can't mention them because if I start mentioning them, I may offend certain groups, but there is information. MUFON, we're not, in the United States, we're not going to be having meetings so much anymore. We're actually more of a publishing company from here on in over the next year. They have all the database for APRO and MUFON since the 50s. All those things are being archived and they will be online. And MUFON will be selling that time to go back to every case that we have, and they have something like 1.2 million pages of reports that will be available to the public. It's not a big hole like everybody thinks. So in conclusion, you know, where does this all fall? Where do they come from? Okay, so if there is aliens or whatever, where do they come from? Time travel. The one commonality I was talking to Travis about was about 2 years ago, a scientist by the name of Lujan Wang used particles and got them beyond the speed of light by using a form of radon gas. In the Bigfoot Valley, there's large deposits of uranium and radon gas. Travis was saying that there is radon gas, not radon gas, but there's uranium up in your mountains too. So you have to think possible, okay, here's a possibility. Could whatever is coming into our system or wherever they're coming from possibly be able to, are they using radon gas to go beyond the speed of light? Rudy Rucker, a physicist in the 1980s, said that if you were, his theory was, and he didn't write about UFOs, he's writing about physics, if you were living on level 1, you may not know there's a level 5 if you didn't have a way to get there. So possibly life is a lot more complex and a little more multidimensional than we'd like to say. I did an interview with Michio Kaku a couple of years ago, and of course his theory is that everything moves, everything is vibrating in continual perpetual motion in space. If you might be a C string, you might not know there's a D string next to you. If you were broadcasting on 101.1, you might not know there's life at 98.5, which makes a lot more sense. We go back to John Mack. Our experiences that people have internal. Is the mind so powerful that we can actually create things? I'm a firm believer in that. When we talked about the Sumerians coming from the ocean, did they come from civilizations that were lost? And maybe these civilizations like Atlantis or whatever, maybe they did exist. I'm a firm believer the Earth is a lot older, civilization is a lot older than we do. Or the last thing is life more just all of the above. It's more complex than we could ever imagine. There's an article in May issue of Scientific American that says, if you haven't read the article, it's really good. And it says that after the Big Bang, scientists are now saying that possibly we formed in parallel universes. And if you look at some of the ancients, they were trying to tell us about geometry, sacred geometry, mathematics, maybe is the key to where we come from. And basically, maybe they were trying to say that if these balls were in perpetual motion, and this was our universe, and this was the next universe, and these, they don't always simultaneously are not next to each other. So it's not a light year thing. It's possibly a wormhole time, a way to get over the time. And there we are. Kenneth Arnold, before he died, said, and he didn't want that experience. He said, if I had to do this over again, I would never do this again. I would never have told anybody about these UFOs. But he basically said, in my experience, that everyone, no matter what part they play in our existence, has a special purpose, a special task, or a special reason for being what they are and what they are doing. Perhaps it is a personal reason, merely to add to your own experience, or mental growth, our ability to become a functional part of society, which may be far more vast than we dream. And I am a firm believer of that. I think everybody in this room basically is a part of something. And I think that's why it's so good to be here and exchange ideas. My analogy to people that are skeptics, not us in here, because I think we're here for a reason. But I tell people, until we invented the microscope, we didn't know there was a whole universe of microscopic things. And if you've never seen a parasite or something under the microscope, you have to take it for granted that something does exist. So I don't know why there's skeptics out there and when they say something doesn't exist, because things do exist. Until we invented the telescope, we couldn't see that there was universes far beyond our eyesight. So I have to say, I just tell people, just because you can't see it, taste it, or smell it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Things do exist. And I think that when we'll find a way maybe to see that maybe life is all around us. Maybe we're interacting in this room with a whole other dimension that is going the same time we do. Maybe planets, there is life on there. We just can't see them.